I drove home expecting silence, but I found my parents' SUV and a massive yellow moving truck blocking my driveway. I had never given them this address. Inside, my mother was measuring cabinets, and my sister announced she was moving in by the weekend. They walked in like they owned the place. They had no idea they had just stepped into a legal trap I had spent 3 years building specifically for them. My name is Eliza Thornton. I am 32 years old, and for the last 8 years, I have spent my days hunting ghosts in the machine. As a senior analyst at Silverline Network Defense, my job is to locate invisible threats, patch vulnerabilities, and ensure that when a client locks their digital doors, they stay locked. I am good at it. I am meticulous. I understand that a breach rarely happens because of a brute force attack. It happens because someone, somewhere, left a small window unlatched. I had spent my entire adult life ensuring my personal windows were not just latched, but bricked over. It was 7:30 in the evening when I turned off the main highway and navigated the winding streets of the quiet subdivision on the edge of Larkridge. My shoulders were tight, a knot of tension sitting at the base of my neck that had been accumulating since my morning briefing. The only thing propelling me forward was the visualization of what waited for me at the end of the drive. It was a single-story bungalow with sage green siding and a porch wide enough for a rocking chair. It was not a mansion. It was not a statement piece. It was a sanctuary. I had bought it 6 months ago. I had signed the deed with a shaking hand and a heart full of terrifying hope. I had decimated my savings account, the one I had started building the day I left for college, to pay the down payment. No one knew about this house, not my coworkers, not my few friends, and certainly not the people who shared my DNA. To my parents and my sister, I was still living in that cramped apartment downtown, the one with the radiator that hissed like a dying cat, and the rent that was just low enough to keep me categorized as the struggling, practical daughter. I turned the final corner, my headlights sweeping across the manicured lawns of my neighbors. I exhaled, preparing to press the remote for my garage door, preparing for the silence that I had bought with my own sweat and blood. Then I slammed on the brakes. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. My brain refused to process the visual input for 3 full seconds. I blinked, hoping the image would rearrange itself into something logical, something benign. It did not. Parked directly in my driveway, blocking the path to the garage entirely, was a maroon SUV. I knew that car. I knew the dent on the rear bumper from when my father backed into a fire hydrant 3 years ago. I knew the sticker on the back window that proudly announced my sister's university, a school she had attended for 1 semester before dropping out to find herself. But the SUV was not the worst part. Beside it, taking up the rest of the driveway and spilling onto the walkway I had just power washed last weekend, was a moving truck. It was bright yellow, aggressive and loud against the muted tones of the evening. The back ramp was down. My first instinct was a desperate, clawing denial. This had to be a mistake. Perhaps they were visiting a neighbor. Perhaps the GPS had led them astray, and they had pulled into my driveway to turn around. But people turning around did not lower the ramp of a moving truck. People visiting neighbors did not park with such proprietary arrogance, taking up every inch of available space. I shifted my car into park, but I did not turn off the engine. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Beside me, in the passenger seat, Moose, my rescue terrier mix, let out a low, anxious whine. He felt it too, the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden violent intrusion of chaos into our orderly world. I looked at the house, the front door, which I had locked this morning with a keypad code known only to me, was standing wide open. Light poured out onto the porch. Shadows moved across the windows. They were inside. A cold numbness started at my fingertips and spread up my arms. It was a familiar sensation, one I had not felt in years, not since I moved out of my childhood home. It was the feeling of having no walls, of being transparent, of being a resource to be mined rather than a person to be respected. I turned off the ignition. The silence of the engine dying felt like a surrender, but I knew I had to go in. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached over to clip the leash onto Moose's collar. "It is okay, buddy," I whispered, though my voice sounded thin and foreign to my own ears. "We are just going to see what is happening." I stepped out of the car. The evening air was cool, but I was sweating. As I walked up the driveway, I had to navigate around a stack of cardboard boxes that had been offloaded from the truck. They were labeled in thick black marker: art supplies, vintage clothes, Harper's Vibes. I recognized the handwriting. It was my mother's. The loops were large and dramatic, demanding attention. I reached the porch steps. I could hear them now. The sounds were distinct, sharp shards of noise piercing the bubble of my privacy. I heard the heavy thud of something being set down on my hardwood floors. I heard the crinkle of bubble wrap being torn off with zero regard for the mess. And above it all, I heard laughter. It was not the polite laughter of guests. It was the loud, claiming laughter of ownership. I stepped through the doorway. The scene before me was like a hallucination. My living room, which I had curated with such careful minimalism, a single gray sofa, a woven rug, a few framed botanical prints, was in disarray. Boxes were everywhere, a pile of eclectic, brightly colored throw pillows that definitely did not belong to me were scattered over my sofa. And there they were, the three people I had spent a decade building fortifications against. My mother, Karen, was in the kitchen. She had opened every single cabinet door and drawer. She was standing there, holding one of my ceramic bowls up to the light, inspecting it with a critical eye. "This lighting is terrible, Robert," she called out, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "We are going to need to install those pendant lights I saw in the catalog. And these cabinets? They are too dark. They make the space feel small. We should paint them white, definitely white." My father, Robert, was standing by the far wall, holding a laser measuring tape. He was wearing his khaki windbreaker, looking for all the world like a contractor surveying a job site. He didn't look at the art I had hung. He didn't look at the view of the garden. He was looking at the structural integrity, calculating numbers in his head. "Solid build," he muttered, tapping the drywall with his knuckles. "Good resale value in this neighborhood. Though the trim work is cheap, we will have to upgrade that if we want to maximize the equity." And then there was Harper. My sister was standing in the exact center of the living room. She was 28 years old, but she still carried herself with the affected air of a teenager who believes the world is a movie set. Built for her debut. She was wearing a flowing bohemian dress that cost more than my car payment, and she was holding a glass of red wine. My red wine. The bottle I had been saving for my birthday was open on the counter. She spun around slowly, arms outstretched, as if absorbing the energy of the room. "It has good bones," she said, nodding to herself. "The feng shui is a little off, obviously. Too much stagnant energy in that corner. But I can fix it with some crystals and maybe a macrame wall hanging. Yeah, I can work with this." I stood in the foyer, clutching Moose's leash, unable to speak. It was as if I had walked into a parallel dimension where I did not exist, where my name was not on the deed, where my sweat was not in the equity. Harper turned then, and her eyes landed on me. There was no surprise in her face, no guilt, just a bright, vacuous smile. "Eliza, you are finally here," she chirped, as if I were the one who was late to the party. "God, took you long enough. Do you know how hard it is to direct movers when you do not know where the outlets are?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I swallowed, forcing my vocal cords to engage. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice was low, trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "What are you doing in my house?" Mom looked up from the kitchen, setting my bowl down on the counter with a clatter. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Eliza, we are just getting settled." "Settled?" I repeated the word. It felt heavy and sharp in my mouth. Harper took a sip of my wine and walked toward me, her expression shifting into that familiar, patronizing sympathy she used whenever I tried to assert a boundary. "Look, I know it is a little sudden," she said, waving her hand dismissively, "but the universe was telling me it was time for a change. Mom and Dad's place was just suffocating my creative process, you know? I needed a space that breathes, and when I walked in here, I just felt it. This house fits me. She stopped in front of me, looking around the room with a satisfied smirk. I have decided to take the master bedroom. Obviously, because the light is better for my morning meditation. You can take the guest room. It is cozy, really. And honestly, you are at work all the time anyway, so you do not need all this space. She paused, then added the kicker, the command delivered as a casual suggestion. This weekend, I am officially moving in. You can help me unpack. Oh, and you should probably move some of your stuff out of the main closet tonight. I have a lot of clothes. The audacity was so pure, so unadulterated, that it was almost impressive. It was the culmination of 20 years of conditioning. Harper wanted, so Harper received. Eliza existed, so Eliza provided. I looked at my father. He was writing something down in a small notebook, completely ignoring the confrontation. I looked at my mother, who was now rearranging my spice rack because she did not like the alphabetical order. "How did you find this address?" I asked, my voice rising. "I never told you. I never told anyone." Mom waved her hand again, a gesture that erased my question and my privacy in one motion. "Oh, please, Eliza. We are family. Family has no secrets. Besides, we were worried about you. You were being so secretive, hiding away like a hermit. We had to make sure you were making good decisions. You know you are not great with financial judgment. Remember that time you bought that used car without asking your father?" "That was 10 years ago," I snapped, "and I paid for it myself, just like I paid for this house." Dad finally looked up. He adjusted his glasses and gave me a look of mild disappointment. "Technically, the bank paid for it. Eliza, do not get ahead of yourself, and with interest rates the way they are, you are going to need help managing this asset. It is a good thing we are here to oversee things. Harper needs a stable environment to launch her new wellness brand, and this, well, it is the least you can do." The least I could do. The phrase echoed in my head. It was the mantra of my childhood. It was the least I could do to give up my Saturday to help Harper with her project. It was the least I could do to wear the hand-me-downs so Harper could have the new prom dress. It was the least I could do to be the invisible foundation upon which they built the shrine of Harper's potential. I looked down at Moose. He was pressing his body against my leg, trembling. He wanted to leave. He wanted to go back to the car, back to safety. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call the police right then and there. But I knew, with a sickening certainty, that if I called the police now, my parents would spin it. They would tell the officers I was unstable, that I had invited them, that this was a family dispute. They would play the loving parents helping their ungrateful daughter, and without hard evidence of their intrusion, without a clear paper trail of my refusal, it would be my word against the three of them. I took a step back, needing distance. My eyes darted around the entryway, looking for an anchor, something that proved this was still my reality. That was when I saw it. On the small wooden console table by the door, right next to the shoe rack where I kept my running sneakers, there was a small pile of mail. It wasn't the mail I had brought in yesterday. It was new mail. I reached out and picked up the top envelope. It was from the bank that held my mortgage. It was a standard notification, likely about property taxes or escrow adjustments, but my eyes locked onto the address window. The name on the letter was Eliza Thornton, but the address below it was not the address of this house. It was 104 Maple Drive, my parents' address. My breath hitched. I looked at the postmark. It was dated 3 days ago. They hadn't just found my address. They hadn't just followed me home one day. I looked up at my mother, who was humming a tune as she opened my refrigerator. "You changed my mailing address," I said. It wasn't a question. Mom didn't even turn around. "Well, of course, dear, we noticed you were missing some important notices because you are always so busy with that computer job. We just called the bank and had them route everything to the family home. It is safer that way. We can screen everything for you. Make sure you do not miss anything important." She said it so casually, as if committing federal mail fraud and identity theft was the same as watering my plants while I was on vacation. They had impersonated me. They had accessed my accounts. They had rerouted my legal correspondence to their house so they could monitor my assets, track my purchases, and when they saw the size of the house I had bought, they decided it was too good to be wasted on just me. I looked at the letter in my hand. The paper felt thin and sharp. This wasn't a visit. This wasn't just an overstepping of boundaries. This was a hostile takeover. They had not just walked through my door, they had breached my firewall. They had looked at the life I built, the one thing that was purely, solely mine, and decided it was simply another resource for the family to consume. I looked at Harper, who was now taking a selfie in front of my bay window, captioning it with lies about her new beginning. I looked at my father, who was already mentally spending the equity of my home. I looked at my mother, who was treating my kitchen like her personal domain. A strange sensation washed over me. The shaking in my hands stopped. The panic that had been fluttering in my chest solidified into something cold and heavy, like a stone dropping to the bottom of a well. For 32 years, I had been the strong one, the silent one, the one who fixed the problems, paid the bills, and swallowed the insults. I had been the safety net they never thanked and the bank they never repaid. They thought I was standing here in silence because I was overwhelmed. They thought I was quiet because I was accepting my fate, just as I always had. They were wrong. I was quiet because I was calculating. I was a security analyst. My entire career was built on observing threats, documenting behavior, and neutralizing intruders. I did not react emotionally to hackers. I reacted methodically. I let them think they were undetected while I traced their IP, locked their back doors, and prepared the kill switch. My parents and my sister had walked into my house thinking it was their territory. They had no idea they had just walked into a honeypot. I lowered the letter, sliding it into my purse along with my keys. I reached down and patted Moose's head, signaling him to stay calm. "Okay," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used in the boardroom when I was explaining a catastrophic data breach to a client. Harper turned, beaming. "See? I knew you would be cool with it. We are going to have so much fun. Eliza, it will be just like old times." Just like old times. The words hung in the air, a threat disguised as nostalgia. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I looked at the three of them, really looked at them, not as my family, but as vulnerabilities in my system. "You are right," I said softly. "It will be exactly like old times." But inside, where they couldn't see, where the real Eliza Thornton lived behind layers of encryption they didn't even know existed, I made a vow. This was the first time they had dared to touch something that was legally mine, and because of that, it would be the last time they ever took anything from me again. I wasn't going to ask them to leave, not tonight. Tonight, I would let them unpack. I would let them get comfortable. I would let them believe they had won. Because the deeper they moved in, the harder it would be for them to escape the trap I was about to spring, to understand why I stood in that living room and let them unpack their boxes. You have to understand the geography of my childhood. We grew up in a mid-sized house on the outskirts of Aurora, Colorado, in a subdivision that prided itself on manicured lawns and silent fences. From the outside, we were the perfect American family. My father, Robert, was a mid-level manager who mowed the lawn on Saturdays. My mother, Karen, was active in the PTA and baked cookies that looked like they belonged in a magazine. But inside those beige walls, we were operating under a dual legal system that was as rigid as it was invisible. There was the law for Harper, and there was the law for Eliza. Harper was 2 years younger than me, but in our household mythology, she was perpetually an infant. She was described in terms usually reserved for antique porcelain or endangered species. She was sensitive. She was an empath. She was fragile. I, on the other hand, was described with words that sounded like compliments but felt like burdens. I was resilient. I was low maintenance. I was the rock. I learned the difference between being a rock and being a person when I was 8 years old. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was in the kitchen, standing on a stool to reach the sink so I could wash the vegetables for dinner. This was my job. I had been peeling carrots since I was 6. Harper was running laps around the kitchen island, trailing a long ribbon behind her, singing loudly. She was bored, and when Harper was bored, the house had to become her playground. I remember the moment with perfect clarity. I turned to place a washed carrot on the cutting board, and Harper came barreling through. Her ribbon caught the handle of a pitcher of water sitting on the counter. The pitcher tipped. Cold water cascaded down the front of the cabinets and pooled on the linoleum floor. Harper shrieked. She didn't get wet, not a drop, but the noise of the plastic pitcher hitting the floor startled her. My mother was there in a heartbeat. She didn't look at the water. She didn't look at me. She dropped to her knees and pulled Harper into a hug, smoothing her hair, checking her for invisible wounds. "Oh, baby, it is okay," Mom cooed, her voice thick with soothing syrup. "It was just a loud noise. You are okay. Breathe with Mommy." I stood on my stool, watching them. I was holding a dripping carrot. Then Mom turned her head and looked up at me. The syrup was gone. Her eyes were cold, annoyed, as if I were a clumsy employee who had just cost the company money. "Eliza, you have to be more careful," she snapped. "Look at this mess. Harper could have slipped and hurt herself. Honestly, sometimes you are so oblivious to the space you take up." I opened my mouth to say that I hadn't touched the pitcher, that Harper's ribbon had snagged it, but I saw the look on my mother's face. It was a look that said, facts did not matter. What mattered was that the atmosphere had been disturbed, and since I was the sturdy one, I was the designated lightning rod for the disturbance. "Clean this up," Mom said, standing up and taking Harper's hand. "Come on, sweetie. Let us go watch cartoons until you feel better." They walked out. I got down from my stool, fetched the mop bucket, and cleaned up the water that I hadn't spilled. I did not cry. Rocks do not cry. They just erode, very slowly over time. Over. My father was sitting at the kitchen table the entire time. He was reading the local newspaper, the sports section folded into a precise rectangle. He had seen Harper run. He had seen the ribbon. He had seen the pitcher fall. I looked at him as I wrung out the mop. I waited for him to say something. I waited for him to tell Mom that it wasn't my fault. Robert Thornton cleared his throat. A dry, rattling sound. He turned the page of his newspaper, snapping the paper taut. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. In our house, silence was not neutral. Silence was an endorsement. My father wasn't the villain who locked me in a cupboard. He was the man who watched the villain work and then asked what was for dinner. His neglect was passive, a sin of omission that hurt worse than any shout, because it confirmed that my reality was not worth defending. This dynamic was codified on the refrigerator. Most families have a chore chart. We had a manifesto of inequality. It was a laminated grid that hung right next to the calendar. My name, Eliza, headed the first column. Underneath it was a list that grew longer every year. Load dishwasher, unload dishwasher, take out trash, vacuum living room, fold laundry, walk the dog, weed the garden. Harper's column was next to mine. It was usually blank, or it contained a single, whimsical entry written in my mother's loopy script. Rest, sometimes accompanied by a drawn heart, or practice creative expression. I asked about it once, when I was 12. I was scrubbing a casserole dish that had baked on cheese, my knuckles raw from the hot water. Harper was in the living room, lying on the carpet, staring at the ceiling because she said she needed to decompress from the stress of middle school. "Why doesn't Harper have to do dishes?" I asked. My voice wasn't angry, it was just tired. Mom didn't even look up from her magazine. "Harper has anxiety. Eliza, you know that. She gets overwhelmed easily. Pressure is bad for her system. It shuts her down." "What about me?" I asked. "Do I not have a system?" Mom laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "Oh, Eliza, you are different. You are practical. You are rational. You can handle things. You are like a little soldier. It is a gift, really. You should be proud that you can contribute so much." They wrapped the unfairness in a compliment so I couldn't reject it without seeming ungrateful. They called it capability, but it was actually exploitation. Being the strong one was not a character trait I was born with. It was a survival mechanism I was forced to develop because the position of fragile one was already permanently occupied. There was only one person who saw the cracks in the stone. My grandmother, Eleanor. She was my father's mother, a sharp-eyed woman with hands that felt like dry parchment and a spine made of steel. She visited us once a month, driving her old sedan down from the mountains. She never said much to Robert or Karen, but she watched. She watched me hauling the laundry baskets up the stairs while Harper sat on the sofa complaining about a hangnail. She watched my father turn the page of his newspaper while I served him coffee. One afternoon, when I was 14, she found me in the backyard, raking leaves. It was a two-person job, but I was doing it alone because Harper had a headache. Eleanor walked over to the fence line where I was stuffing leaves into a black plastic bag. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. It was a fortune to me. "Here," she whispered, pressing it into my dirty glove. I tried to pull back. "Mom says I'm not supposed to take money from you. She says you are on a fixed income." "Mom says a lot of things," Eleanor snapped. Her eyes darted toward the house to make sure we were unobserved. "Listen to me. Eliza, you take this, and you do not put it in the piggy bank on your dresser where your mother can find it and borrow it for pizza night. You put it somewhere else, inside a book, under a loose floorboard." "Why?" I asked, clutching the bill. "Because in this house, you are the engine," Eleanor said, her voice low and fierce, "and nobody ever thanks the engine until it breaks. You keep a little bit of fuel for yourself, child. Do not let them burn it all." I hid that $20 inside the battery compartment of an old radio I never used. It was the first deposit in the bank of my secret life. But money could not buy back the moments they stole from me. The most vivid memory, the one that still made my stomach turn when I lay awake at night, happened when I was 16. I had entered the regional science fair. I had spent 4 months building a complex model demonstrating the efficiency of solar desalination. I had stayed up late nights, soldering wires and gluing panels, all while maintaining my GPA and doing the household laundry. The fair was held in the high school gymnasium on a Saturday morning. I stood by my project in my best blouse, waiting for the judges. My parents were there, standing awkwardly by the bleachers. Harper was with them, sighing loudly and checking her flip phone every 30 seconds. I made it to the finals. The judges came around with their clipboards, asking hard questions. I answered them perfectly. I felt a surge of pride, a rare feeling of being seen for something I had created, not just something I had cleaned. Then, 10 minutes before the award ceremony, my mother walked up to me. She looked frantic. "Eliza, honey, we have to go." "What?" I asked, my heart dropping. "The awards are in 10 minutes. I think I might win." "We cannot stay," Mom said, grabbing her purse. "Harper has that life-drawing workshop at the community center. It starts in 20 minutes, and if we do not leave now, we will hit traffic and she will be late. You know how important this is for her portfolio. She needs this for her artistic confidence." "But I am here," I said. "I am right here. I might win." "You can tell us all about it when you get home," Dad said, jangling his car keys. He didn't meet my eyes. He looked at the exit sign. "We are really proud of you, sport. But we have to prioritize. Harper's class is a one-time thing." They turned and walked away. I watched their backs as they wove through the crowd of other parents who were staying to cheer for their children. I stood alone next to my solar desalination model as the principal announced that I had won second place. I accepted the ribbon and the certificate with a smile that felt like it was stapled onto my face. I walked home alone, carrying my project, the ribbon fluttering in the cold wind. When I got home, the house was empty. They had taken Harper out for celebratory ice cream after her class because she had felt vulnerable exposing her art to a stranger. I went into the kitchen. The sink was full of dishes from breakfast. The trash can was overflowing. I put my second-place ribbon on the counter. It looked small and pathetic next to the pile of dirty plates. I rolled up my sleeves. I turned on the water. It was hot. Scalding hot. But I didn't turn it down. I wanted to feel the burn. I grabbed the sponge and started scrubbing. The back door opened an hour later. I heard them come in. I heard Harper laughing, a bright, bubbling sound that meant she had been fed and validated. "Oh, good. You did the dishes," Mom called out from the hallway, not even coming into the kitchen to see if I was there. "We brought you some ice cream, but it melted in the car. Put it in the freezer. Maybe it will harden up." I stood there, my hands submerged in the gray, greasy water. I looked at the window above the sink, staring at my own reflection in the dark glass. I looked at the girl with the tired eyes and the strong shoulders. I stopped scrubbing. I held my hands still in the water. "One day," I whispered to the empty kitchen, "one day, I will have a sink of my own. I will have a kitchen that stays clean because I am the only one living in it. I will have a house where no one touches a single spoon without my permission." I finished the dishes, I dried them and put them away, but I never ate the melted ice cream. I poured it down the drain and watched it disappear, just like my expectations of ever being loved the way Harper was loved. That was the night I stopped waiting for them to change. That was the night the strong child died, and the strategist was born. If childhood was where the emotional foundation was laid, my teenage years were where the financial walls were erected. I learned early on that in the Thornton household, money was not a finite resource. It was a currency of affection, and the exchange rate was rigged. When Harper turned 16, my father bought her a car. It was a used sedan, a beige Honda that smelled faintly of vanilla air freshener, but it was reliable. It was a solid vehicle. There was just one problem. Harper had failed her driving test, twice. She claimed the instructor gave her bad vibes, and that parallel parking was an aggressive act that triggered her anxiety. So the car sat in the garage, gathering dust, a 2-ton paperweight that cost my father $3,000 plus insurance. I turned 16 a year later. I passed my driving test on the first try with a perfect score. I came home with the temporary license warm in my pocket, feeling a surge of pragmatic hope. I had just secured a job interview at a bookstore across town, but the bus routes were unreliable. "Can I use the Honda?" I asked my father at dinner, "just to get to the interview and back. Harper is not using it." My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at her salad. "Eliza, honey, that is Harper's car," Mom said, as if explaining why I couldn't wear my sister's underwear. "We bought it for her. It is her safe space. If you take it, even for a few hours, it might disrupt her sense of ownership. We do not want to stress her out. She is planning to take the test again, eventually." "But it is just sitting there," I argued, keeping my voice level. "The battery is going to die if no one drives it. I need to get to work so I can start saving for college." Mom sighed, putting down her fork. "Why does everything have to be a negotiation with you? If you want to get around, you are perfectly capable of walking or taking the bus. It builds character. Harper needs the car to feel grounded. You do not need that. You are tough." So I walked 2 miles to the bus stop, took 2 transfers, and walked another mile to the interview. I didn't get the bookstore job because I arrived sweating and flushed. I ended up taking a job at a coffee shop called The Roasted Bean, working the closing shift because it fit around my school schedule. I worked 20 hours a week on top of my AP classes. I made $7.25 an hour. Every paycheck went into a generic checking account that my parents had access to for monitoring purposes. I bought my own jeans. I bought my own winter coat because my mother said the one I had was fine, even though the zipper was broken and the wind cut right through it. When it came time for college applications, the financial favoritism stopped being annoying and became predatory. Harper, despite her average grades and complete lack of extracurriculars, had her heart set on a private arts college in Savannah. The tuition was $45,000 a year. Room and board was another $15,000. I sat at the kitchen table as my parents spread out the brochures. The paper was glossy, showing students painting by a river. "It is expensive, Robert," my mother said, chewing her lip. "But look at the program. It is holistic. They do not grade on a curve. They grade on growth. Harper needs that. If we put her in a state school, She will get swallowed up. She will wither. We can take out a second mortgage, Dad said, tapping his calculator, and I can cash out a portion of my 401k. It is an investment in her future. Then they turned to me. I had a 4.0 GPA. I had high SAT scores. I had applied to the State University's engineering program, specifically for cybersecurity. You, on the other hand, Mom said, smiling brightly, are in a great position. You are so smart. Eliza, you can go to the state school. It is affordable. And with your grades, you will get scholarships. We really do not need to worry about you. They didn't worry. They also didn't contribute. I did get a scholarship. It covered tuition. It did not cover housing. It did not cover meal plans. It did not cover the exorbitant cost of textbooks. When I showed my father the breakdown, showing a gap of $8,000 for the first year, he shrugged. You can work, he said. You have always been a hard worker. Get a job on campus. Student loans are an option. You know, it is good debt. So while Harper flew off to Savannah with a new wardrobe and a prepaid credit card for emergencies, I moved into a triple dorm room at the State University, sharing a closet with 2 other girls. I took the maximum amount of student loans allowed in my name, and I got a job. 2 jobs, actually. I worked the graveyard shift at the computer lab from midnight to 6 in the morning. 3 days a week. It was quiet, which allowed me to study, but it meant I walked through campus in the dark, exhausted, fueled by vending machine coffee. On weekends, I flipped burgers at a fast food joint near the stadium. My life became a blur of code and grease. I learned to sleep in 4-hour bursts. I learned that if you waited until the cafeteria was closing, the staff might give you the leftover bagels for free. I learned that hunger is a cold, sharp pain that sits just below your ribs and never really goes away. The breaking point came in the winter of my sophomore year. I was taking an advanced network security course. The required textbook was a massive, hardcover volume that cost $280. I needed it to pass the class. I also needed to pay my share of the utility bill for the off-campus apartment I had moved into, which was due in 3 days. I checked my bank account. I had $42.16. I stared at the screen, panic rising in my throat like bile. I had worked every shift available. I had eaten instant noodles for 3 weeks straight. There was no fat left to trim. I picked up the phone and called home. Mom answered on the 3rd ring. She sounded breathless, happy. Eliza, we were just talking about you. How are classes? I need help. Mom, I said, cutting through the pleasantries. My voice cracked. I need $300. I have a textbook I have to buy, and if I buy it, I cannot pay the electric bill. I am working as much as I can. But the hours got cut at the burger place and… Eliza, slow down, she interrupted, her tone shifting from warm to lecturing. Mom, please, I said, I just need a loan. I will pay you back in the summer. I promise. There was a silence on the line. Then I heard my father in the background asking what was wrong. Mom covered the mouthpiece for a second, then came back on. Honey, we have talked about this, she said, her voice firm. You need to learn to budget. Part of being an adult is anticipating expenses. You knew this book was coming. You should have set money aside. I did set money aside, I said, tears stinging my eyes, but the rent went up, and I had to pay for the bus pass. And we are not a bank, Eliza, she said. We cannot just bail you out every time you have a cash flow problem. It would be enabling you. You are the practical one, remember? Figure it out. Maybe you can pick up an extra shift or sell some clothes. But Mom, I have to go. Honey, your father and I are about to watch a movie. We love you. Be strong. The line went dead. I sat on my mismatched thrift store chair in my freezing apartment. Holding the phone, I felt hollowed out. I didn't sell clothes because I didn't have any worth selling. I ended up illegally downloading a PDF of an older edition of the textbook and praying the page numbers matched. I kept the lights off for a week to lower the bill. I ate plain rice. 2 weeks later, I was in the computer lab, working my shift. It was 3 in the morning. I was monitoring the network traffic, fighting to keep my eyes open. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a butt dial from my mother. She must have been holding her phone while talking. I answered, thinking it might be an emergency. "Mom?" I heard her voice, clear and loud, laughing. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to her friend, Mrs. Gable. "Oh, I know. It is a fortune, but Harper really needed it," Mom was saying. She called me crying last week, saying the energy in Savannah was too chaotic. She was completely blocked artistically. So Robert and I decided to send her to this wellness retreat in Big Sur. It is focused on ocean healing. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my hand trembling. "How much was it?" Mrs. Gable asked. $3,000 for the week, Mom said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Plus airfare. But you cannot put a price on mental health. Linda. She sent me a picture this morning. She looks so peaceful. She is finding herself. I lowered the phone. I didn't hang up. I just set it down on the desk and let their voices tinily buzz against the hard plastic surface. $3,000. For a week of ocean healing. I looked down at my hands. They were chapped from the cold because I couldn't afford gloves. My stomach growled, a loud, cramping reminder that I had skipped dinner to save $5. I thought about the $300 I had begged for. The $300 that would have meant I didn't have to worry about the lights being cut off. They had refused me not because they didn't have the money. They had refused me because investing in my survival was boring. Investing in Harper's whims was a noble cause. I felt something snap inside me. It wasn't a loud break. It was quiet, like a wire being cut in a dark room. I pulled up Facebook on the lab computer. I navigated to Harper's profile. There it was, posted 2 hours ago, a photo of Harper standing on a pristine beach in California, wearing a white linen dress that probably cost more than my entire semester of books. She was holding a green juice, looking wistfully at the horizon. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to disconnect to reconnect. Thank you, Mommy and Daddy, for making this journey possible. Blessed healing ocean vibes." I looked at the screen until my eyes burned. I looked at her tan skin, her relaxed shoulders, the easy, unearned grace of someone who has never had to calculate the cost of a calorie. Then I looked at my reflection in the dark monitor. I saw the dark circles under my eyes. I saw the cheap, fraying hoodie I had worn for 3 days straight. They were starving me to feed her excess. I closed the browser window. I picked up my phone and ended the call. The next day, there was a knock on my dorm room door. I opened it to find my grandmother, Eleanor, standing there in the hallway. She looked out of place in the dingy corridor, wearing her wool coat and holding her handbag with both hands. "Grandma?" I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "It is a 2-hour drive." "I was in the neighborhood." She lied. She walked in, looking around the cramped room, taking in the peeling paint and the single bag of rice on my shelf. She didn't say anything about the poverty. She didn't offer pity. She sat down on the edge of my narrow bed and opened her purse. She pulled out a small white envelope. "It is not much," she said, holding it out. $500? I cashed in some savings bonds." "Grandma, I cannot," I started to say, the shame rising up. "Take it," she commanded. Her voice was sharp, cutting through my resistance. She stood up and walked over to me, taking my hand and pressing the envelope into my palm. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Eliza, listen to me," she said, looking me dead in the eye. "Your parents, they are confused people. They think love is something you give to the one who cries the loudest, but they are wrong." She squeezed my hand. "Do not let them spend your strength like cash," she whispered. "That is what they are doing. They are using your resilience to subsidize her weakness. They think because you can carry the weight, you should. But strength has a price. Child, your strength has a price. Do not give it away for free anymore." She left as quickly as she had come, leaving me standing in the middle of the room with the envelope burning against my skin. I opened it. 5 crisp $100 bills. I looked at the money. It was enough to pay the utility bill. It was enough to buy the textbook. It was enough to eat real food for a month. But I didn't spend it. I realized then that if I used this money to fix the problems my parents had caused, I was still playing their game. I was still letting them drain me, just with a different source of refill. I needed to change the flow. I needed to build a reservoir that they couldn't see, couldn't touch, and couldn't drain. I put on my coat and walked to a bank 3 blocks away. Not the bank my parents used. Not the bank where my checking account lived. I walked into a credit union where I was just a number, not a daughter. I sat down with a banker and opened a high-yield savings account. "Name of the account?" the banker asked, typing on his keyboard. I thought about the car in the garage. I thought about the retreat in California. I thought about the cold nights and the hunger. I thought about the door I wanted to walk through one day and never look back. "Exit," I said. "Excuse me?" "Call it exit," I said firmly, all caps. The banker typed it in. I deposited the $500. It was the seed. From that day forward, I changed my strategy. I stopped asking for help. I stopped complaining. When my mother called to ask how I was, I lied. I told her everything was fine. I told her I had plenty of food. I told her the scholarship covered everything. I worked more shifts. I ate the free bagels. But every single spare dollar, every cent I saved by walking instead of taking the bus, every dime I earned from fixing a classmate's laptop, went into the exit account. I let them believe I was fine so they wouldn't look too closely. I let them believe I was the strong, low-maintenance daughter who didn't need anything. They thought my silence was contentment. They didn't know it was the quiet hum of a machine building a weapon, and that weapon was freedom. Graduation was not a ceremony of celebration for me. It was a release from a hostage situation. I accepted my diploma with a firm handshake, skipped the department mixer, and moved directly into the next phase of my existence. I had secured a position at Silverline Network Defense, a mid-sized cybersecurity firm located in an industrial park on the edge of Larkridge. The starting salary was $55,000 a year. To my parents, who viewed money as something that magically appeared and disappeared based on the phases of the moon, this sum would have sounded like a lottery win. To me, it was a strategic resource. My job title was Junior Security Analyst. In practice, I was a digital janitor and a professional paranoid. My days were spent combing through lines of code, hunting for vulnerabilities in corporate networks. I learned how hackers think. I learned that they do not break down the front door with a battering ram. They find the window that someone left cracked open an inch for fresh air. They look for the password taped to the bottom of the keyboard. They exploit trust. It was terrifying work, but it was also illuminating. It taught me that safety is an illusion created by vigilance. It taught me that if you want to keep something safe, you do not just hide it. You bury it under layers of bureaucracy and boredom where no one thinks to look. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a complex that smelled perpetually of dryer sheets and curry. The carpet was a shade of beige that hid stains well, and the view was of the dumpster. But the lock on the door was heavy, and I paid for it myself. This was where Moose entered the picture. I found him at a shelter event in a parking lot. He was a terrier mix with one ear that stood up and one that flopped down, and he looked at me with eyes that held the same guarded caution I felt every time my phone rang. I paid the adoption fee of $75, bought a bag of kibble, and took him home. For the first time in my life, I had a living creature in my space that did not demand anything from me other than food and a scratch behind the ears. I established a routine that was military in its precision. I woke up at 6. I walked Moose. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner. I studied for my advanced certifications. And I saved. The exit account from college was retired, replaced by a new high-yield savings account at an online bank that had no physical branches. I named this one Northwind. Every 2 weeks, when my direct deposit hit, the money was siphoned off before I even saw it. Rent was $850. Utilities were $100. Groceries were $200. Student loan payments were $300. Everything else, every single leftover cent, went to Northwind. I lived as if I were still a broke student. I drove a 10-year-old sedan I had bought for $2,000 cash. I wore clothes from discount racks. When my coworkers went out for happy hour drinks that cost $12 a glass, I went home and drank tap water. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the only one who knew the scope of my austerity. She had stopped giving me cash, knowing that physical money could be found or borrowed. Instead, she gave me knowledge. We met once a month at a diner halfway between Larkridge and her home. She would slide books across the Formica table like contraband: The Intelligent Investor, Real Estate Law for Beginners, Tax Strategies for the Self-Employed. You are building a foundation. Eliza, she told me over coffee one rainy Tuesday, but a foundation needs walls, and you need to make sure those walls are made of something that cannot be blown down. She tapped the book on real estate law with her arthritic finger. Brick walls write their own laws better than other people's walls, she said. When you rent, you are living in someone else's kingdom. You follow their rules. When you own, you draw the lines. I devoured those books. I learned about amortization schedules and property taxes. I learned about equity and appreciation. I began to see a house not just as a place to sleep, but as a legal fortress. While I was building my fortress in silence, Harper was building chaos in surround sound. My sister's life was a series of expensive pivots. After the art school in Savannah proved too theoretically restrictive, she dropped out. My parents absorbed the tuition loss of $40,000 without a murmur. Harper came home and decided she was a freelance graphic designer. My father bought her a top-of-the-line iMac and a subscription to the entire Adobe Creative Suite. She designed 3 logos, got bored, and decided the screen time was damaging her aura. Next came the online vintage shop. My mother spent weekends driving Harper to estate sales, buying up old coats and vases. The inventory piled up in my parents' dining room because Harper found the process of shipping packages administratively draining. Then came the phase that infuriated me the most: the color healing. Harper took a weekend certification course, paid for by my father, and declared herself a chromotherapist. She started selling courses on how to heal your trauma through the vibration of blue. She charged $200 a session. She had 0 clients, but she spent thousands on business cards, a website, and a studio setup in my parents' basement. The financial strain on my parents was becoming visible. I could hear it in the tone of my mother's voice when she called me. It was a tight, high-pitched cheerfulness that barely masked the panic. They started calling me for financial advice. "Eliza, honey," my father asked one evening, his voice engaging that fake professional tone he used when he was embarrassed. I was wondering, you work with computers and systems. Do you know of any credit cards that have, let us say, flexible application requirements? "What do you mean flexible?" I asked. Sitting on my floor folding laundry, Moose was asleep on my feet. "Well, cards that maybe do not look too closely at the debt-to-income ratio, just for a short-term bridge. We are waiting for some of Harper's business investments to mature." I closed my eyes. Investments. They called her failed hobbies investments. "I do not really deal with consumer credit. Dad," I said, keeping my voice flat, "I work in network security. It is a different field." "Well, surely you know something," my mother chimed in from the extension. "You are doing so well. We are so proud of you. By the way, did you get a raise recently? We heard that tech companies give out big bonuses this time of year." The trap was so obvious, it was insulting. They were fishing. They wanted to know if I had enough margin to cover their mistakes. "I didn't get a bonus," I lied smoothly. "Actually, the market is tightening. They cut our overtime. Things are pretty tight right now." "Oh," Mom said. The disappointment was palpable. "Well, that is a shame. We were hoping maybe—" "Well, never mind. We just thought, since you are living so simply, you might have some liquidity." "I have student loans, Mom," I said, "and rent." I refused to give them an inch. I refused to co-sign a car lease when Harper decided she needed a van for her mobile healing unit. I refused to send them a copy of my pay stub when they tried to help me file my taxes. I filed my own taxes the day the forms became available, ensuring they couldn't claim me or access my data. I became a ghost in their financial ledger. I was present at Thanksgiving. I sent cards for birthdays, but my wallet was a black hole to them. But the pressure was mounting. I knew that as long as my name was Eliza Thornton, daughter of Robert and Karen, I was vulnerable. Names can be looked up. Relationships can be leveraged. Guilt is a powerful fishing tool. The breakthrough happened on a Tuesday in October, over a basket of truffle fries. I was having lunch with Tara, a senior developer at my company. Tara was everything I wasn't: loud, brash, and comfortably wealthy. She drove a Porsche and wore leather jackets to client meetings. She was also the only person at work who knew even a fraction of my family history. "I am so tired of the apartment," I confessed, dipping a fry into the aioli. "The neighbor upstairs is learning to play the trumpet. Moose barks every time he hits a high C. I just want a yard. I want a fence. I want to open a door and let him run without worrying about traffic." "So buy a house," Tara said, shrugging. "You have been saving like a monk for 3 years. You must have a down payment by now." "I do," I admitted. "I have enough for a solid 20% down on a starter home." "So what is the problem?" "If I buy a house," I said, lowering my voice, "they will find out. Property records are public. My dad checks the county assessor's website like it is the morning news. He is obsessed with real estate values. If he sees my name on a deed, he will know I have money. And if they know I have money, they will move in, literally. Harper is already talking about how the basement energy is toxic." Tara chewed her fry thoughtfully. She took a sip of her sparkling water and looked at me with a glint in her eye. "Eliza, you are a security analyst. Act like one." "What does that mean?" "You do not put your server on the public internet without a firewall, right?" Tara said. "So do not put your house on the public record with your name on it." I frowned. "But the deed has to have an owner." "Yeah, an owner, not necessarily a person." She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Form an LLC. Eliza, a limited liability company. Give it a boring name that sounds like a dental practice or a landscaping firm. Buy the house in the name of the LLC. Your name appears on the formation documents with the Secretary of State. Sure, but you can use a registered agent service to keep your address off those forms. On the deed? On the mortgage? It is just the company name." I stared at her. My brain started spinning, processing the logic. "An LLC?" I asked. "Is that legal for a personal residence?" Tara grinned. "Rich people do it all the time to hide from paparazzi and stalkers. Your family is basically a pack of financial stalkers. You have a legitimate reason to protect your assets. Treat the house as a rental property owned by the company. You are the tenant. You pay rent to your own company. It is a little more paperwork, but it buys you the one thing you cannot afford to lose." "What is that?" "Anonymity." I went back to my desk that afternoon, but I didn't write a single line of code. I spent 4 hours reading the state statutes on limited liability companies. I read about articles of organization. I read about operating agreements. I read about the veil of protection that separates a business entity from the individual behind it. It was elegant. It was structural. It was exactly what Grandma Eleanor had meant about walls writing their own laws. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table. Moose was snoring in his bed. I had my laptop open. The glow of the screen illuminated the empty takeout containers from dinner. I navigated to the Secretary of State's website. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A rhythmic thud of adrenaline. This felt bigger than leaving for college. This felt bigger than getting the job. This was an act of secession. I clicked on File New Entity. I needed a name. I thought about the cold wind that blows down from the mountains, the wind that strips the dead leaves off the trees and leaves only the strong branches. I thought about the savings account that had silently grown, month after month, fueled by my denial of every luxury. I typed in the box, Northwind Haven LLC. I moved to the section for purpose of business. I could have been vague. I could have written general business, but I wanted to be specific. I wanted to manifest the reality I was creating. I typed, to hold, manage, and maintain real estate assets. I filled out the rest of the form. For the registered agent, I used a commercial service Tara had recommended, paying them $150 a year to use their address instead of mine. This meant that if anyone searched for Northwind Haven LLC, they would find an office building in the state capital, not my apartment, and certainly not my future home. The filing fee was $50. I entered my credit card information. I hovered the cursor over the Submit button. I thought about Harper's healing room in my parents' basement. I thought about my mother's voice asking for credit cards. I thought about the day they left me at the science fair to take Harper to a drawing class. I wasn't just buying a house, I was incorporating myself. I was turning Eliza Thornton from a daughter into an institution. I clicked Submit. The screen refreshed. A green banner appeared at the top. Filing accepted. I sat back in my chair and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 16 years old. I was no longer just Eliza. I was the sole member and manager of Northwind Haven LLC. I looked down at Moose. We are going to get that yard. Buddy, I whispered to him, and nobody is going to have the key to the gate but us. It was the first legal step of a plan that would take 2 more years to execute. 2 years of searching. 2 years of saving. 2 years of playing the broke daughter while I built a kingdom in the shadows. I didn't know then that the walls I was building would eventually trap my family, but I knew that for the first time in my life, I was holding the trowel. For 3 years, I lived a double life, to the world and my family. I was Eliza, the struggling analyst, the girl who drove a car with a rattling muffler and wore sweaters that had seen better days. I nodded sympathetically when my mother complained about the cost of Harper's latest failed venture. I declined invitations to expensive dinners, citing student loan payments. I played the role of the financially fragility dutifully, all while the Northwind Haven LLC account grew, dollar by silent dollar. When the balance finally hit the target number, enough for a 20% down payment plus closing costs and a modest emergency fund, I did not pop champagne. I did not call a friend. I opened a private browser window and began to hunt. I wasn't looking for luxury. I wasn't looking for a statement piece to impress neighbors I didn't have yet. I was looking for a bunker disguised as a home. I viewed 14 houses in 3 weeks. I saw them alone, during my lunch breaks, or on Sunday mornings when I told my parents I was working overtime. I walked through split levels that smelled of mold and ranch houses that backed up to noisy highways. I kept my face impassive, treating each viewing like a site inspection, checking for structural vulnerabilities rather than curb appeal. Then I found the bungalow. It was sitting on a quiet street on the outer rim of Lark Ridge, a neighborhood that was neither up-and-coming nor declining. It was simply existing. The house was built in the 50s. It had white siding that needed a power wash and a front porch that was slightly sagging, but the roof was new, and the foundation was poured concrete, thick and unyielding. I walked through the front door and felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child, hiding in the fort I made of blankets. Safety. The kitchen was outdated, with laminate countertops that were peeling at the edges, but it faced the backyard. And the backyard was the selling point. It was not huge, but it was flat, green, and most importantly, it was completely enclosed by a 6-foot wooden privacy fence. I stood on the back deck, looking at that fence. It was weathered and gray, but the planks were tight. There were no gaps. I imagined Moose running back and forth in the grass, chasing squirrels, untethered by a leash, protected from the world. This is it, I whispered to the empty air. This is the fortress. The purchasing process was a masterclass in paranoia. I instructed my real estate agent that under no circumstances was my personal name to appear on the offer letter. The buyer was Northwind Haven LLC. The proof of funds came from a bank account under the same name. When I applied for the mortgage, it was the trickiest part. Since the LLC had no credit history, I had to personally guarantee the loan. This meant the bank knew who I was. They had my social security number, my employment history, my blood type practically, but I made it clear to the loan officer, a woman named Sarah, who looked at me with a mixture of confusion and respect, that the deed was to be titled solely in the name of the company. So, on the public record, Eliza Thornton did not buy a house. A faceless entity did. The closing took place at a title company downtown. I sat in a conference room with a mahogany table that was too big for the room. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer, electric adrenaline of executing a plan I had nurtured for years. The stack of papers was 3 inches thick. I signed my name over and over again. Eliza Thornton, manager. Eliza Thornton, authorized signatory, Northwind Haven, LLC. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room. It was a rhythmic, decisive sound. Scratch, swoosh, dot, scratch, swoosh, dot. With every signature, I was severing another thread that tied me to my family's expectations. The lawyer, a balding man with a kind face, pushed the final document toward me. It was the deed. "Congratulations," he said, sliding a heavy brass key across the polished wood. He smiled. "From now on, you are not just the director of the company. You are the landlord. Try to be nice to the tenant." I laughed, a genuine sound that surprised me. "I am the best tenant I know." I said, "I always pay on time." I walked out of that office with the key in my pocket. It felt heavy and hot, like a piece of a star. I implemented the security protocols immediately. I rented a post office box at a shipping center 3 miles away from the new house. That became my official mailing address for everything. The utility bills, the internet service, the insurance. I did not update my address with my doctor, my dentist, or the Alumni Association. As far as those databases were concerned, I still lived in apartment 2B. I moved in over the course of 3 nights, using a rented van that I loaded myself in the dark alley behind my apartment complex. I didn't hire movers. Movers talk. Movers leave digital records. I carried every box myself, my muscles aching, sweating through my t-shirt, fueled by the manic energy of escape. The first 2 weeks in the bungalow were a blur of exhaustion and euphoria. It was a honeymoon, just me and the house. I remember the first morning I woke up there. The sun was streaming through the bedroom window, a rectangle of pure, unfiltered gold on the hardwood floor. There was no sound of the upstairs neighbor practicing the trumpet. There was no smell of someone else's curry. There was just silence and the soft, rhythmic breathing of Moose, who was sleeping on a rug beside the bed. I got up and walked to the kitchen in my bare feet. The floor was cold, but it was my cold floor. I made coffee. I opened the back door and let Moose out. I stood there, mug in hand, and watched him. He hesitated for a second on the deck, looking back at me, waiting for the leash. "Go on, buddy," I said softly. "It is all yours." He took a tentative step, then another. Then, realizing he was free, he exploded into a run. He did laps around the yard, his ears flapping, barking at a blue jay on the fence. I leaned against the door frame and cried. I cried for the 16-year-old girl who couldn't borrow the car. I cried for the college student who ate plain rice in the dark. I cried because for the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for impact. I spent those weeks claiming the space. I painted the living room a deep, calming sage green. I bought a vintage leather armchair off an online marketplace from a guy 2 towns over, paying cash and hauling it in the back of my sedan. It was worn and cracked, but it was comfortable, and it didn't match anything, and I loved it because my mother would have hated it. I reveled in small acts of rebellion. One night, I played jazz records at full volume at midnight, dancing around the living room in my socks, simply because there was no one to tell me to turn it down. Another night, I ate dinner, a grilled cheese sandwich, and left the plate in the sink. I looked at the dirty plate with a fierce affection. It could stay there until morning. It could stay there for 3 days if I wanted. There was no chore chart here. There was no passive-aggressive sighing. But even in paradise, the serpent of anxiety was slithering in the grass. The first warning sign was a clerical error. About 3 weeks after I moved in, I stopped by my old apartment complex to turn in my keys and check the mail one last time before my forwarding order to the P.O. box fully kicked in. In the metal box, mixed in with the junk flyers for pizza, was a letter from the bank. It was a confirmation of my address change for my personal checking account. I had specifically instructed them to use the P.O. box, but there, in the window, was the address of the new house. My heart stopped. I went to the bank branch immediately, my hands shaking as I spoke to the teller. I had them correct it. I had them purge the street address from the correspondence field. They apologized. They said it was a system glitch, that the physical address on the mortgage file had auto-completed into the mailing field. I fixed it, but the damage to my peace of mind was done. A letter with my name and the new address had existed in the world. However briefly, it was a leak. The second warning was more direct. Harper came to visit me at work one day. This was rare. Harper usually only appeared when she needed money or a ride. She breezed into the lobby of Silverline Network Defense, wearing an oversized tie-dye sweatshirt and carrying a matcha latte. I had to meet her in the reception area because I didn't want her near my desk. I was holding my phone, showing her a picture of Moose to distract her from asking why I looked tired. A notification banner dropped down from the top of the screen. It was an email from a furniture store where I had just bought a new mattress for the house. The subject line read, "Order confirmation. Delivery scheduled for 124 Oak Street." Harper's eyes were faster than mine. "What is 124 Oak Street?" she asked, tilting her head. "Is that a new restaurant? Or are you buying something for a friend?" I swiped the notification away, my pulse spiking. "Oh, nothing," I said, trying to sound bored. "It is just a work thing. We are sending a care package to a client. I am coordinating the logistics." Harper narrowed her eyes. "Since when do you coordinate logistics? I thought you just stared at code all day like a robot." I shrugged. "New responsibilities. You know how it is." She seemed to buy it, launching into a monologue about how her throat chakra was blocked. But later that night, I saw she had posted a story on her social media. It was a black screen with white text that read, "My sister is being so secretive lately, buying mystery gifts for clients. I smell a secret boyfriend. Or maybe she is finally living a little." I stared at the screen. She didn't know about the house. She thought it was a boyfriend. But she was sniffing around. She was noticing the anomalies. I realized then that secrecy was a heavy coat to wear in the summer. It was suffocating. I needed to tell someone, just to release the pressure valve. I invited Tara over. She was the only person allowed through the gates. When she pulled into the driveway and saw the house, she let out a low whistle. "Damn, Eliza," she said, getting out of her Porsche. "You actually did it. You went full ghost." We sat on the back deck, drinking cheap beer and watching Moose chew on a rubber toy. "You know," Tara said, gesturing to the high fence, "this place gives off serious witness protection vibes. Are you sure you are not hiding from the mob?" I laughed, but it was a dry sound. The mob would be easier. I said, "The mob just wants your money or your life. My family wants my soul and my credit score." Tara raised her bottle in a toast. "To the Witness Protection House. May they never find you." We clinked bottles. It felt like a blessing. But blessings in my life had a way of turning into curses if I didn't watch them closely enough. It was a Tuesday evening in November. I was driving home from work, navigating the familiar turns toward my sanctuary. The heater in my car was finally working, blowing warm air on my feet. I was thinking about the new kettle I had bought. I was thinking about making a cup of hot cocoa and sitting in my leather armchair to read a book on network architecture. I felt safe. I felt invisible. I didn't know that 3 hours earlier, my father, sitting in his den 10 miles away, had been bored. I didn't know that he had been scrolling through the county tax assessor's website, looking at the property values of houses in random neighborhoods, judging the market. I didn't know that he had clicked on a recent sale in the Larkridge outskirts, curious about how much a bungalow was going for these days. And I didn't know that he had seen the owner's name listed as Northwind Haven LLC. Most people would have scrolled past. but my father was a man who prided himself on knowing things. The name Northwind had triggered a faint memory, a memory of a bank statement he had glimpsed over my shoulder years ago. Or perhaps a notebook I had left on the counter during a visit. Or maybe he just remembered the name of the street where I lived when I was born. Northwind Drive. He had clicked on the entity name. He had followed the breadcrumbs to the Secretary of State's business search. He had paid the $5 fee to download the articles of organization. And there, at the bottom of the PDF, in black and white, was the signature of the organizer, Eliza Thornton. I knew none of this as I pulled into my garage and closed the door against the night. I slept soundly, wrapped in my ignorance. The next morning, I arrived at my desk at Silverline. I put down my bag and reached for my mail slot. There was the usual stack of interoffice memos and vendor flyers, but on top of the pile was a thin white envelope. It was from the county tax collector. That in itself wasn't strange. I had used my work address for some of the initial filing correspondence to avoid the P.O. box delay. What was strange was the condition of the envelope. The flap was wrinkled. The gummed edge was rough, as if it had been steamed open and then hastily resealed with a glue stick. There was a smudge of dirt on the corner, a thumbprint that looked gray and oily. I picked it up. I held it to the light. The paper inside had been folded slightly crookedly, not the machine-perfect fold of a government mailer. Someone had opened this. Someone had read the contents. The property tax bill for 124 Oak Street, addressed to Northwind Haven LLC, and then tried to cover their tracks. I turned the envelope over. There was no return address other than the tax office, but I could smell it. Faintly, the smell of vanilla air freshener, the kind that hung in my parents' car. Or maybe it was just my imagination, my panic filling in the sensory details. But the glue was real. The thumbprint was real. I stood there in the middle of the busy office, the hum of servers and the chatter of colleagues fading into a dull roar. My stomach dropped. The cocoa from the night before turned to acid in my gut. In my line of work, I spent every day teaching clients a simple, brutal truth. Data that is touched always leaves a fingerprint. You can wipe the logs, you can mask the IP, but if you physically interact with the system, you leave a trace. I just never expected the trace to be a smudge of glue on an envelope on my desk, and I never expected the breach to originate not from a hacker in a basement halfway around the world, but from the people who had driven me to build the firewall in the first place. I gripped the envelope until it crinkled. They knew. The Witness Protection House had been compromised, and unlike a digital breach, I couldn't just patch the code. I had to go home and wait for the attack. The air in the living room was so thick with entitlement I could practically taste it. It tasted like stale perfume and ozone. I stood by the open front door, my hand still gripping the brass handle, watching the 3 people who shared my DNA dismantle my sanctuary with the efficiency of a demolition crew. My mother, Karen, was no longer just looking at the cabinets. She had moved into the dining area and was running her hand along the wall, nodding as if she were approving a venue for a wedding. She turned to me, her face flushed with the excitement of a new project. "The light in here is actually quite good," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "If we move that armchair," she pointed to my vintage leather chair, the one I had hauled home with my own 2 hands, and put it in the corner. "We can open up this space for a proper easel. Harper needs natural light from the north, and this window is perfect." Harper, hearing her name, spun around from where she was standing in the hallway. She had abandoned her glass of wine on my coffee table without a coaster. A ring of red condensation was already forming on the wood. "Oh, I already picked my spot," Harper announced. She pointed a manicured finger toward the hallway, specifically at the door to the second bedroom. "That small room next to the master? That is the studio. It has the best energy. I walked in there and I just felt my creative chakras align. It is fate, really." My stomach tightened. That was my office. That was where I had my server rack, my 3-monitor setup, and my whiteboards covered in network schematics. It was the brain of the house. "That is my office, Harper," I said, stepping fully into the room and letting the door click shut behind me. "I have sensitive equipment in there. It is not a studio. Harper rolled her eyes, a gesture so practiced it seemed to engage her entire body. Eliza, be serious. You work on a laptop. You can sit anywhere. You can sit at the kitchen table. You can sit on the couch. You can sit at a coffee shop. I need a dedicated space. Art requires physical expansion. Your work is just typing. It is invisible. You do not need square footage for invisible work. She turned her back on me, dismissing my objection as if it were a fly buzzing near her ear. She walked over to the wall and tapped it. We should paint this. Mom, that sage green is so depressing. It feels like a doctor's waiting room. I am thinking something vibrant, maybe a Tuscan yellow or a coral. Coral would be lovely. Mom agreed, pulling a notepad out of her purse. I will write that down. We can stop by the hardware store tomorrow morning. I felt a surge of heat rise up my neck. They were discussing painting over my walls. The walls I had painted at 2 a.m, listening to jazz, feeling the thrill of ownership, while I was standing right there. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice louder this time, cutting through their interior design session. Why are you moving things? Why is there a truck in my driveway? Mom sighed and walked over to me. She reached out and patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a restraint. Eliza, honey, we told you. It is the plan. What plan? I asked. I never agreed to a plan. Well, we tried to call you, but you are always so hard to reach with that job of yours, she said, rewriting history in real time. Look, the situation at home was becoming impossible. Harper has so much inventory now for her shop, and her art supplies are taking over the dining room and the den. Your father could not even find a place to sit down to read his paper. It was stifling her. She gestured around my living room. And then we found out you had this place, and it is so spacious. Eliza, it is just you and the dog. You are rattling around in here. It makes no sense for you to hoard all this space while your sister is suffocating in a basement. So, we decided Harper will stay here for a while, just until she gets her feet under her. Temporarily, Dad added from the corner. He was holding a tape measure against the baseboard. Just until the business takes off. It is an incubation period. I looked at Harper. She was now scrolling through her phone, probably looking up coral paint swatches. She didn't look like someone who was looking for an incubator. She looked like someone who had just conquered a new territory. I looked back at my mother. How did you know? I asked again, the question that had been burning a hole in my throat. How did you know this house was mine? I bought it under an LLC. My name is not on the deed. Mom smiled, a tight, conspiratorial smile. She leaned in, as if sharing a secret recipe. Well, that was actually quite funny. She said, a few weeks ago, we got a letter at the house. It was from the county tax office. It looked very official. It was addressed to Northwind Haven, LLC. My blood ran cold. The glue, the fingerprint. I did not know what it was. Mom continued, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I thought maybe it was junk mail. Or maybe you had signed us up for something without asking. So, I opened it. I was just trying to help. Eliza, I did not want you to get in trouble with the government. She paused for effect. And when I saw it was a tax bill for this address, I was confused. I mean, who is Northwind Haven? It sounded like a retirement home. So, I did what any responsible mother would do. I called the bank. You called the bank? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Of course, I called the number on your old bank statements, the ones that still come to the house sometimes, and I asked to speak to a manager. I told them I was your financial proxy. I gave them your social security number. I still have it memorized from when you were a baby, you know, and I asked them to verify if this Northwind company was legitimate. I was worried you were being scammed. Eliza, there are so many predators out there. She patted my arm again. And the nice man on the phone told me not to worry. He pulled up the file. He said, yes, Mrs. Thornton, Northwind Haven, LLC, is fully owned by your daughter, Eliza. He said you were the sole proprietor. She beamed at me. I was so relieved, but then I thought, Well, if Eliza owns it, then the family owns it. That is how it works, isn't it? We help you. You help us. It is a circle. And since you have this big, empty asset just sitting here, it seems silly not to utilize it. I stared at her. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. She had social engineered my bank. She had used my personal data to impersonate me or authorized herself, bypassed security protocols, and extracted the ownership structure of my company. It was a breach, a massive, catastrophic breach of privacy. But she framed it as protection. She framed it as love. Dad stepped forward then, snapping the tape measure shut. He looked at me with a serious, businesslike expression. You know, Eliza, he said, pointing a finger at the ceiling, I have been talking to a buddy of mine down at the city planning office. Since this lot is on a corner, the zoning is a bit flexible. I blinked. What are you talking about? Maximizing the asset, he said, as if it were obvious. If we knock down the wall between the kitchen and the mudroom, we could technically install a separate entrance, put in a kitchenette, turn the back half of the house into a rental unit. He nodded to himself. Harper could live in the main part, obviously, because she needs the space. But you could live in the back unit, or we could rent it out to students. The passive income would be significant. We could split it. 60-40. I would take the 60, of course, since I would be managing the renovation. I looked at him. He wasn't just moving Harper in. He was planning to remodel my home. He was planning to partition it. He was planning to monetize it. Dad, no. I said, I am not knocking down walls. I am not renting out a unit. This is my house. Robert frowned, looking disappointed. You are being short-sighted. Eliza, real estate is about leverage. You are sitting on dead equity. While he lectured me on equity, my eyes drifted to the entryway table, the small console where I dropped my keys and mail. Harper was standing there. She was hovering over the table, pretending to examine a vase, but her hand moved. It was a quick, practiced movement, like a magician palming a coin. She reached out and snatched the spare brass key I kept in a small ceramic bowl. It was the key I kept for emergencies, for Tara if she ever needed to get in. I saw the flash of brass. I saw her hand slide into the deep pocket of her flowing dress. She looked up. Our eyes met. She didn't look away. She didn't blush. She just smiled, a small, defiant curve of her lips, and turned back to the living room. She had the key. She had physical access. I looked at the three of them, my mother, the social engineer, my father, the unplanned developer, my sister, the occupier. I was outnumbered, I was tired, and I knew, with the instinct of a trapped animal, that if I tried to kick them out tonight, it would turn into a war I wasn't ready to fight. They would scream. They would cry. The neighbors would call the police, and without my legal documentation ready, without a strategy, I would look like the hysterical daughter throwing her family out on the street. I needed time. I needed to regroup. I needed to talk to a lawyer. I took a deep breath. I unclenched my fists. Okay, I said. The word hung in the air. Mom clapped her hands together. Oh, wonderful. I knew you would be reasonable. Temporarily, I added, my voice hard. Harper can stay for a few days, until she finds a place, but she is not moving in permanently, and we are not painting the walls. Mom waved her hand. We will see. We will see. Let us just get her settled first. She reached into her oversized tote bag. Oh, that reminds me, she said. Since we are all on the same page now, I wanted to save you a trip to the post office. She pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. I took it. It was a change of address form for the county tax assessor. It was already filled out. It requested that all future tax bills and legal notices regarding the property at 124 Oak Street be mailed to 104 Maple Drive, my parents' address. And at the bottom, on the signature line, was my name. It was signed. It wasn't my signature. It was a loopier, softer version of my name. It was my mother's handwriting attempting to be mine. I already sent the original in. Mom said breezily, This is just a copy for your records. I figured since you are so busy at work, you would not want to deal with the paperwork. And since Dad is going to be helping manage the property now, it makes sense for the bills to come to us. We can just let you know what you owe." I stared at the forgery. She had not only invaded my home, she had hijacked my mail stream. She was attempting to divert the legal ownership documents to her control. "This is," I started to say, but the words stuck in my throat. "This is illegal." "Oh, Eliza, do not be so dramatic," she snapped. "It is administrative. I am your mother. I have been signing your permission slip since you were 5. It is the same thing." She turned to Dad. "All right, Robert, I think we have done enough for tonight. We should get back and start packing the rest of Harper's things." She looked at me. "We will be back on Saturday morning with the big truck. Make sure you clear out that closet in the master bedroom. Eliza, and maybe buy some organic almond milk. Harper is off dairy this week." They swept out of the house like a storm system moving out to sea. Harper gave me a little wave as she walked past, her hand patting the pocket where my key sat. "See you soon, roommate," she chirped. Dad gave the wall one last thump. "Think about that rental unit, Eliza. It is free money." The door closed. Silence rushed back into the room. But it wasn't the peaceful silence I cherished. It was the stunned, ringing silence of a crime scene. I stood in the middle of the living room. The pillows were still scattered. The air still smelled of their perfume. I looked down at the forged tax form in my hand. The paper was crisp. The ink was black. I walked over to the entry table. The ceramic bowl was empty. The spare key was gone. I felt a sudden, sharp paranoia. I walked to the hallway closet where I kept my modem and router. The door was slightly ajar. I pulled it open. The lights on the router were blinking in a pattern I recognized. It was the reboot sequence. They had reset it. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened the network admin app. My hands were shaking so hard I had to type the password twice. I logged in. I checked the device history. There it was. Harper's MacBook Pro. Connected at 7:42 p.m. It was currently authorized on the network. She hadn't just looked at the walls. She hadn't just taken a key. While Mom was distracting me with the tax story, Harper had physically pressed the reset button on the router, restoring it to factory settings, and used the default password printed on the sticker to connect her laptop. She was inside my network. I stared at the blinking lights of the modem. They blinked like eyes in the dark. I realized then that this wasn't just a family boundary issue. This wasn't just about them disregarding my feelings. They had physically compromised my locks. They had legally compromised my mail. And they had digitally compromised my network. They hadn't just stepped into my house. They had stepped into every single layer of protection I had built. They were occupying my physical space, my legal identity, and my digital footprint. I stood alone in the dark hallway, clutching the evidence of their crimes. The house felt cold. The walls felt thin. For years, I had treated them like a difficult family. I had treated them like emotional vampires. But standing there, looking at the unauthorized device on my network, I realized I had misclassified the threat. They weren't family. They were hostiles. And I was behind enemy lines in my own home. The silence that filled the house after they left was not the peaceful silence of solitude. It was the heavy, static-charged silence of a crime scene. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt loud enough to echo in the empty hallway. I locked the front door. Then I engaged the deadbolt. Then I dragged a heavy dining chair and wedged it under the doorknob. It was a primitive defense for a sophisticated threat, but I needed the physical barrier to stop my hands from shaking. I did not go to sleep. I went to my office, the room Harper had already claimed as her future studio, and woke up my 3-monitor workstation. The glow of the screens washed over my face, cool and familiar. This was my domain. Out there in the living room, I was a daughter who could be bullied. In here, I was an analyst who hunted invisible predators. I logged into the dark web monitoring service I subscribed to, but everything was clean. Then I navigated to the bureau portal to check my standard credit report. I refreshed the page. A red flag appeared at the top of the dashboard. New hard inquiry. Alert. My stomach dropped. A hard inquiry meant someone was trying to open a line of credit in my name, or using my credit history to back a loan. It was dated yesterday. I clicked on the details. The inquiry was from a financial institution called Granite Peak Lenders. I had never banked with them. I had never even visited their website. I dug deeper, because I had premium access to detailed credit monitoring tools through my job. I could see more than just the inquiry. I could see the metadata associated with the request. I pulled up the rejection notice that had been automatically generated. The loan application had been denied. I opened the file attachment. The application was for an unsecured personal loan in the amount of $50,000. The applicant listed was not Eliza Thornton. The name on the primary applicant line was Robert Blake. Blake was my father's middle name. I scanned down the document. In the section for collateral or guarantor, the address 124 Oak Street was listed, my house, and next to it was a signature that looked eerily like mine, but slightly off. It was stiff. It lacked the natural flow of a hand moving across paper. It looked like someone had traced my signature from an old birthday card and scanned it onto the PDF. He had tried to use my house, my secret fortress, as leverage for a $50,000 loan, using a variation of his name to perhaps bypass immediate family fraud filters, while listing me as the guarantor who would be on the hook if he defaulted. I felt a cold, hard rage settle in my chest. It replaced the fear. I looked at the digital footprint of the application. Every online transaction leaves a trace. Most people think hitting delete or using an incognito window makes them invisible. It does not. I pulled the IP address from the submission log. 74.129. I did not need to run a traceroute. I knew that IP address. It was the static IP for the residential gateway at 104 Maple Drive, my parents' house. He had sat in his den, perhaps drinking a cup of coffee, and committed felony identity theft and loan fraud against his own daughter, and the only reason it had failed was because the automated underwriting system at Granite Peak Lenders had likely flagged a mismatch between the deed owner, Northwind Haven LLC, and the personal guarantor name. My LLC had saved me from financial ruin before I even knew I was under attack. I grabbed my phone and dialed Tara. It was nearly midnight, but she answered on the first ring. Eliza? What is wrong? You never call this late. They are inside, I said. My voice sounded strange, devoid of emotion. Not physically. Physically they are gone, but digitally, legally. Tara. My father tried to take out a $50,000 loan against my house yesterday, and Harper reset my router. She is on my network. I heard Tara inhale sharply. Okay, she said, her voice shifting instantly from sleepy friend to crisis manager. Listen to me. Do not cry. Do not panic. You are a security professional. You treat this like a breach. What is the containment strategy? I am locking everything down. I said, but Tara, Harper said she is moving in this weekend. They have a truck coming. You need a lawyer, Tara said firmly. Not a family lawyer. You need a shark. You need someone who eats fraud for breakfast. Write this name down. Elliot Calder. He handled a nasty intellectual property dispute for my cousin. He is expensive, but he is lethal. I wrote the name down on a sticky note. And Eliza? Tara added. Stop thinking of them as mom and dad. In cybersecurity terms, they are bad actors. They are an advanced persistent threat. You do not negotiate with malware. You purge it. I hung up. I spent the rest of the night changing every single password I owned. I enabled two-factor authentication on accounts that didn't even need it. I remotely kicked Harper's laptop off my network and blacklisted her MAC address. I set up a firewall rule that would alert me if any device from the manufacturer Apple, other than my own, attempted to connect. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the packet traffic on my network monitor, waiting for a blip that never came. The next morning, I called Elliot Calder's office at 8 o'clock sharp. I used my title at Silverline Network Defense to get past the receptionist. By 10 o'clock, I was sitting in a conference room that smelled of expensive leather and intimidation. Elliot Calder was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He wore a suit that cost more than my first car, and he listened to my story without blinking. I laid it all out on the mahogany table: the deed to the house, the articles of organization for Northwind Haven LLC, the credit report showing the hard inquiry from Robert Blake, the log showing the IP address, the forged change of address form for the tax assessor that my mother had handed me. Calder picked up the credit report. He adjusted his glasses. "This is textbook," he said, his voice dry. "It is clumsy, but it is malicious. Your father attempted to encumber a property he does not own, since the property belongs to the LLC. His attempt to pledge it as collateral without the corporate seal or the manager's authorization is void ab initio. But the attempt itself? That is fraud." He looked at the tax form. "And this? This is mail fraud and forgery." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Ms. Thornton, you have enough here to send your parents to federal prison. Is that your objective?" I looked at my hands. I thought about the years of small cuts, the way they ignored my achievements, the way they prioritized Harper's whims over my survival. But prison? "No," I said quietly. "I do not want them in prison. I just want them gone. I want them out of my house, out of my finances, and out of my life. I want to be impenetrable." Calder nodded. "Then we go with the nuclear deterrent. We do not file criminal charges yet. We prepare them. We hold them over their heads like a guillotine blade." He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and uncapped a fountain pen. "Here is the plan. Phase 1 is physical hardening. You change the locks today. You install cameras at every ingress point. You put up a no trespassing sign. It sounds petty, but legally, it establishes boundary awareness." I nodded. "I can do that." "Phase 2 is the paper trail." Calder continued. "I am going to draft a cease and desist order regarding the use of your identity. I will also draft a formal notice to quit for your sister, stating that she has no lease, no rights of tenancy, and that any attempt to move furniture into the dwelling will be treated as breaking and entering." "And Phase 3?" I asked. "Phase 3 is the extraction. When they show up with that truck, you do not open the door. You do not argue. You call the police and request a civil standby. You show the officers the deed proving the LLC owns the property. You show them the unauthorized access logs. You paint a picture not of a family squabble, but of a corporate asset being trespassed upon by unauthorized individuals." He looked me in the eye. "Can you do that, Eliza? Can you watch your mother cry in front of a police officer and not open the door?" I thought about the key Harper had stolen. I thought about the loan application. "Yes," I said, "I can." I left his office with a lighter step. I had a strategy. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an operator executing a protocol. For the next 2 days, my phone buzzed incessantly. The text messages arrived in a steady barrage, a mix of affection and demands that was designed to keep me off balance. "Mom, Eliza, honey, Harper needs a firm mattress for her back. We are looking at a queen size. Can you measure the bedroom door frame to make sure it fits? Also, pick up some lavender detergent. She has sensitive skin." Harper: "Hey sis, I was thinking about the vibes in the living room. Those blinds have to go. I need velvet curtains. Maybe deep purple? It helps with creativity. Can you order some so they are there when I arrive? Put it on your card. I will pay you back when my shop takes off." Dad: "Send me the floor plans." Eliza: "I need to calculate the square footage for the rental unit conversion. My contractor buddy can come by on Monday to start tearing down that kitchen wall." I read them all. I did not reply. Or rather, I did not reply with the words they wanted. I replied with silence, or I sent a thumbs-up emoji. I let them believe my silence was submission. I let them believe I was busy running their errands. In reality, I was running a counter-operation. I scheduled the locksmith for Saturday morning at 7 o'clock. I scheduled a private security company to install a ring of cameras around the perimeter on Friday afternoon. I scheduled a junk removal crew, big guys with a massive truck, to be parked around the corner on Saturday at 9. I sat in my living room on Friday night. The house was dark. I had taped a large piece of butcher paper to the wall where Harper wanted her velvet curtains. On it, I had drawn a timeline. 700. Locksmith, 800. Perimeter check, 100. Target arrival estimated, 005. Police contact. It was an incident response board. I used sticky notes to map out the vectors of attack. Mom was the social engineer. Dad was the financial threat. Harper was the insider threat. I stripped away the titles of mother, father, sister. Those titles implied loyalty. Those titles implied safety. The people coming to my house were none of those things. They were hostiles attempting a hostile takeover. My phone rang. It was late, past 10. I looked at the screen, expecting another demand for organic milk or thread counts. But the name on the screen was Grandma Eleanor. I picked up immediately. Grandma, is everything okay? Eliza. Her voice sounded thin, shaky. I do not have much time. Your father is in the other room. I am calling from the landline in the sewing room. What is going on? I asked, gripping the phone. They are doing it. Eliza, they are going to the bank on Monday. Doing what? The cabin, she whispered. The family cabin. Your grandfather built that place with his own hands. It is free and clear. But Harper, she has debt. Eliza, more than they told you. Credit cards, business loans for those failed shops. It is over $30,000, and the collectors are calling. I closed my eyes. $30,000. Your father thinks he can take out a home equity line on the cabin to pay it off. Eleanor continued. He thinks the market is up, so it is free money. He says they will pay it back when Harper becomes famous. They will lose it, I said. Harper will never pay it back. They will default, and the bank will take the cabin. I know, Eleanor said, and I heard a sob catch in her throat. I cannot let them take your grandfather's legacy. I cannot let them burn it down to keep Harper warm for another winter. What can we do? I asked. You need to come see me, she said, tonight, or first thing tomorrow, before they get here with that truck. Why? Because the cabin is not entirely theirs to mortgage, she said, but they do not know that yet. I need to transfer the deed. I need to put it in the trust, and I need a trustee who is not a fool. I looked at the timeline on my wall. 0700. Locksmith. I cannot leave the house. Grandma, I said, they are coming tomorrow morning. If I am not here to hold the line, they will break in. Harper has a key. Then send someone you trust, Eleanor said, or come now. It is a 2-hour drive. You can be back before dawn. Eliza, this is the only leverage we have left. If they mortgage that cabin, they will drain the family dry. You have to stop the bleeding. I looked at the clock. It was 10:30, 2 hours there, 2 hours back, an hour to sign papers. I would be back by 4 in the morning. It was risky, leaving the fortress unguarded on the eve of the siege. But if I didn't go, they would destroy the one piece of history that actually meant something to me. I am coming, I said. I hung up. I grabbed my keys. I looked at Moose. You are on guard duty, buddy, I told him. Bark at anything that moves. I walked out to my car. I looked back at the house. It stood dark and silent against the night sky. My fortress, my walls. I was about to drive 200 miles to save a different set of walls, armed with nothing but coffee and rage. As I backed out of the driveway, I realized that my timeline on the wall was incomplete. I reached into my bag, pulled out a marker, and wrote on a sticky note in my mind. Objective: total asset denial. I wasn't just defending my house anymore, I was liquidating their ability to harm me ever again. I drove into the night, the engine humming a low, aggressive note. The victim was dead. The strategist was behind the wheel. I drove 2 hours through the pitch-black darkness, fueled by a gas station coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and the adrenaline of impending warfare. I met my grandmother, Eleanor, at a 24-hour diner just off the highway, 10 miles from the nursing home where she lived. She was sitting in a corner booth, looking small against the red vinyl, a thick manila envelope resting under her hands like a shield. She didn't hug me when I sat down, She just pushed a cup of decaf tea toward me and tapped the envelope. "Open it," she said. Her voice was raspy, but her eyes were clear, sharp with the same intelligence I liked to think I had inherited. I slid the papers out. It was a legal document, thick and bound with a blue cover, the Eleanor Thornton Living Trust. I flipped through the pages. Legalese swam before my tired eyes. Beneficiaries, trustees, assets. Then my eyes caught a section halfway through. Schedule A. Assets transferred. Listed there was a small portfolio of blue-chip stocks, and below that, the legal description of the cabin in the Rockies. The cabin my grandfather had built log by log in 1972, the place where I had learned to fish, where I had hidden from Harper's tantrums in the hayloft, where I had felt the only moments of peace in my childhood. I looked at the section for trustee. I expected to see my father's name, Robert Thornton. He was the only son. He was the patriarch. But his name wasn't there. Primary trustee, Eliza Thornton. Beneficiary of the cabin asset, Eliza Thornton. To be held in trust for the preservation of the family legacy. I looked up at Eleanor. My mouth was dry. "Grandma," I whispered, "you cut them out." She took a sip of her tea, her hand trembling slightly. "I did not cut them out. Eliza, I protected the asset. There is a difference." She leaned forward, lowering her voice even though the diner was empty except for a trucker eating pie at the counter. "Your father called me 3 days ago." She said, "He was talking about the cabin. He was talking about how the market is hot. He said Harper is in trouble. Real trouble. That credit card debt she has? It is not just credit cards. She took out a business loan for that crystal healing nonsense, and she signed a personal guarantee. The interest rate is predatory, 25%. She owes nearly $40,000. Eliza. And the collectors are calling the house." I closed my eyes. $40,000, and they were buying velvet curtains for my windows. "Your father wants to take a home equity line on the cabin to pay it off," Eleanor continued. "He thinks he is saving her. He thinks if he just clears the slate one more time, she will finally fly right." She shook her head, a slow, sad movement. "But she will not fly. Eliza, she has never had to flap her wings because they have carried her everywhere. If I let him mortgage that cabin, he will lose it. They will default. I know it as surely as I know the sun will rise. And I will not let your grandfather's work be sold at a foreclosure auction to pay for Harper's bad decisions." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin felt like dry paper, but her grip was iron. "I am not giving the cabin to people who are ready to burn it to save a leaking boat," she said fiercely. "I am giving it to the only person in this family who knows how to build. You know how to construct a life. Eliza, you know the value of $1. You are the only one who will keep the roof from caving in." Tears pricked my eyes. It was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged that my struggle was a skill, not a personality defect. "But Grandma," I said, my voice shaking, if they find out you gave it to me, they will go nuclear. They are already invading my house. If I take the cabin too, they will say I stole their inheritance." "Let them say it," Eleanor said. "The trust is signed. It is notarized. It is filed. It is done. They can scream all they want, but they cannot touch the title." She pushed the envelope closer to me. "Keep this. Do not tell them yet. Let them walk into the bank on Monday and find out the hard way that the collateral they want to pledge does not belong to them anymore. Use it as your shield, Eliza, or your sword, whatever you need." I drove back to Larkridge as the sun was coming up, the envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. I felt a shift inside me. Before, I had been fighting to defend my perimeter. Now, I had seized the high ground. I went straight to Elliot Calder's office. I didn't even go home to shower. I walked in at 9 o'clock, looking disheveled but vibrating with intensity. I handed him the trust documents. Calder read them in silence. A slow, professional smile spread across his face. "This changes the landscape," he said, tapping the paper. "This is significant. Your grandmother has effectively removed their financial safety net, and place the control in your hands. It confirms that a third party, a matriarch, no less, recognizes your competence and their instability in a court of law, or even in a negotiation. This is powerful character evidence. He looked at me. They are going to hate you for this, Eliza. I know. I said, I am done trying to be liked. I just want to be safe. Then let us execute the plan, Calder said. We spent the next hour finalizing the logistics for Saturday. It was a military operation. First, the police. Calder drafted a request for a civil standby, citing the unauthorized access to my network and the potential for a domestic disturbance. We weren't asking them to arrest anyone. We were asking them to stand there and look imposing so that my parents would be too embarrassed to scream. Second, the physical security. I confirmed the locksmith would arrive at 7 a.m. to rekey every door. I confirmed the security cameras were active and recording to a cloud server that my family couldn't access. Third, the cleanup. The junk removal crew was on standby. Anything that Harper had brought into the house, her boxes, her easel, her bad energy, was going into that truck. Then came the final step, the warning shot. You need to send the email. Calder said, it has to be in writing. Text messages are messy. An email is a document. It establishes that you gave them notice. It destroys their narrative that they were invited tenants. I sat at a desk in Calder's office and opened my laptop. I stared at the blank screen. I thought about Harper's laugh as she took my key. I thought about my mother's voice lying to the bank teller. I thought about my father trying to mortgage my future. I began to type. To Robert Thornton, Karen Thornton, Harper Thornton, from Eliza Thornton, Manager, Northwind Haven, LLC. Subject, Notice regarding occupancy of 124A, Oak Street. Dear Robert, Karen, and Harper, I am writing this email to clarify the misunderstandings regarding the property located at 124 Oak Street. This property is owned by Northwind Haven, LLC. As the manager of this entity, I have not authorized any lease, sublease, or tenancy agreement with Harper Thornton. Harper does not have permission to move into this property. Any personal property currently stored at this location without my explicit written consent will be removed. Any attempt to establish residency will be treated as trespassing. Furthermore, I have become aware of unauthorized attempts to access my digital network and unauthorized changes to my tax correspondence. These actions are illegal. I have taken steps to secure the property and my identity. Do not bring a moving truck to my house this weekend. If you do, you will be denied entry. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. Sincerely, Eliza Thornton. I read it over. It was cold. It was impersonal. It was perfect. I hit send. The reaction was immediate and nuclear. My phone started buzzing before I even got to the elevator. First came the texts from Mom. Eliza? What is this? Is this a joke? Why are you emailing us like a lawyer? We are your family. How dare you speak to your father this way? After everything we have done for you, we are trying to help you. You are being cruel. Harper is crying. She is hysterical. You are breaking her heart. Do you want your sister to be homeless? Then came Dad. His texts were shorter, more menacing. You are making a mistake. You are destroying this family over a house. Call me immediately. I do not know who is putting these ideas in your head, but you need to stop. You are out of your depth. And then Harper, she didn't text me. She went straight to the court of public opinion. I opened social media. There it was, a black and white photo of a wilting flower. The caption read, "It hurts the most when the betrayal comes from your own blood. Some people get a little bit of power and forget where they came from. I guess money really does change people. Send good vibes. My heart is shattered by a toxic sister today." I watched the likes roll in. I watched the comments from our cousins and her friends saying things like, "Stay strong, babe, and karma will get her." I felt a pang of the old guilt, the conditioned response to fix it, to apologize, to smooth things over. But then I touched the envelope in my bag. The trust. The truth. They weren't upset because I was hurting them. They were upset because their victim was fighting back. I drove home. I parked in the garage and closed the door. I walked through the house. It was Friday night, the eve of battle. I went to the guest room where Harper had already started piling her boxes. I looked at them. Art supplies, winter coats, journals. They were invasive species taking root in my ecosystem. I went to the kitchen. I checked the locks. I checked the windows. I fed Moose. I watched him eat, the rhythmic crunch of kibble the only sound in the house. I poured myself a glass of wine, my wine, from a bottle I had hidden in the vegetable crisper so Harper wouldn't drink it. I sat in my leather armchair. The house felt different tonight. For weeks, it had felt like a secret I was hiding. Now, it felt like a fortress I was manning. My phone lit up again. Another text from Mom. "We are coming tomorrow. Eliza, we are going to sort this out like a family. Stop being ridiculous." I didn't reply. I turned my phone off. I stood up and walked to the front window. I looked out at the street. It was empty and quiet. The streetlights hummed. Tomorrow, the yellow truck would come. Tomorrow, the screaming would start. Tomorrow. I would have to stand in this doorway and look my mother in the eye and tell her no while a police officer watched. My heart was racing, but my hands were steady. I reached down and scratched Moose behind the ears. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the empty room. "Tomorrow. We either take it all back, or we lose it all." I looked at the reflection of the room in the dark glass of the window. I saw a woman standing there who looked tired. Yes, but she didn't look like a daughter anymore. She looked like the owner. I chose to fight. The morning sun hit the pavement of Oak Street with a clarity that felt surgical. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. I was standing in my driveway, wearing a blazer and tailored trousers, holding a binder of documents against my chest. I was not Eliza the daughter, waiting for a family visit. I was Eliza the manager of Northwind Haven LLC, waiting for law enforcement to execute a perimeter breach. A black and white cruiser turned the corner, moving with a slow, deliberate weight. It pulled up to the curb, blocking the entrance to my driveway just as I had requested. Officer Ramirez stepped out. She was a woman in her 40s with a tight bun and eyes that had seen every variation of domestic lie imaginable. I walked forward to meet her. My hands were steady, stabilized by the sheer weight of the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Officer Ramirez," I said, "I am Eliza Thornton. Thank you for coming." She nodded, adjusting her belt. "You are the property owner?" I handed her the binder. It was tabbed and color-coded. "I am the manager of the LLC that owns the property," I corrected. "Here is the deed. Here is the certificate of organization. Here is the email notice sent to the unauthorized occupants stating they have no lease and no permission to reside here. And here is the log of unauthorized digital entry into my security system." Ramirez flipped through the pages. She didn't smile, but her eyebrows lifted slightly as she saw the level of documentation. "Thorough," she commented. "So, who is inside?" "My sister, Harper Thornton." I said, "She broke in using a stolen key 2 days ago. She is refusing to leave. I have a locksmith and a removal crew arriving in 10 minutes. I need you to ensure the peace is kept while I reclaim my property." She handed the binder back. "Stay behind me, Ms. Thornton. Let us see if we can do this the easy way." We walked up the driveway. The house looked peaceful, the curtains drawn. It looked like a home, but to me, it was a compromised server that needed to be wiped. Behind us, a white van marked Lark Ridge Lock and Key pulled up. Behind that, a massive box truck from Got Junk rumbled to a halt. The drivers got out and stood by their vehicles, arms crossed, waiting for the signal. Neighbors were starting to peek through their blinds. I saw Mrs. Higgins across the street sipping coffee in her bathrobe, watching the show. Ramirez walked up the steps and pounded on the door. The sound was authoritative, a heavy rhythmic thud that demanded an answer. "Police, open up!" There was silence for a moment. Then I heard shuffling, the sound of a lock turning. The door opened. Harper stood there. She was wearing silk pajamas and a sleep mask pushed up onto her forehead. She looked groggy. her hair a mess. She blinked at the officer. Then her eyes slid past the uniform and landed on me. "Eliza?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "What is going on? Why is there a cop? Is Mom okay?" Officer Ramirez stepped forward, blocking Harper's view of me. "Ma'am, are you Harper Thornton?" Harper nodded, looking confused. "Yeah. Who are you?" "I am Officer Ramirez. I am here to escort you off this property. You are trespassing." Harper laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Trespassing? What are you talking about? I live here. This is my sister's house. We are roommates." I stepped out from behind Ramirez. I looked my sister in the eye. I didn't feel the old urge to protect her. I didn't feel the guilt. I felt the cold precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. "You are not my roommate." "Harper," I said. My voice was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You are a guest who overstayed. You have no lease. You pay no rent. You have no key that was given to you willingly. I sent you a legal notice yesterday telling you not to move in. You ignored it." Harper's face crumpled from confusion into the ugly, twisted shape of a tantrum. "You cannot do this," she screamed. "Mom said I could stay. We have a plan." "The owner of the property has requested your removal," Ramirez said calmly. "You have 15 minutes to gather your essential items. The rest will be removed by the crew." "No!" Harper shrieked. She tried to slam the door, but Ramirez put a boot in the frame, stopping it with a heavy thud. "Do not do that," Ramirez said, her voice dropping an octave. "Step aside, ma'am." Harper backed away, her hands flying to her face. She pulled out her phone. "I am calling Mom. You are crazy. Eliza, you are actually crazy." She dialed, sobbing loudly. "Mom! Mom! Come quick! Eliza called the cops. She is trying to kick me out. She has a gun. No, the cop has a gun. Just come." I stood on the porch and waved to the removal crew. "Start with the living room," I instructed. "Everything that is not the leather chair or the gray sofa goes." The crew marched past a sobbing Harper like a column of ants. They began hauling out boxes, art supplies, vintage clothes, good vibes. 10 minutes later, tires screeched in the driveway. My parents' maroon SUV swerved around the police cruiser, hopping the curb and tearing up a strip of my lawn before coming to a halt on the grass. My mother, Karen, flew out of the passenger seat before the car had even fully stopped. She was wearing a tracksuit, her face a mask of terrified fury. "Stop! Stop it right now!" she screamed, running toward the porch. "That is my daughter. You cannot touch her." Officer Ramirez stepped in front of her, hand raised. "Ma'am, stay back. This is a civil enforcement." Karen tried to push past her. "Enforcement? This is a family home. That is my daughter's house. Eliza, tell them to stop. How could you do this? How could you humiliate us like this?" My father, Robert, climbed out of the driver's side. He looked shaken, pale, but he was clutching a folder of papers. He walked up to the officer, trying to summon his usual air of middle management authority. "Officer, there is a misunderstanding here," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "This property is a family asset. We have financial interests here. You cannot just evict a resident without due process." He thrust the folder at Ramirez. "Look," he said, "look at this. I have the paperwork right here. We were in the process of securing financing on this property. I am a guarantor. That establishes residency rights." I watched him dig his own grave. Ramirez took the folder. She opened it. It was the printout of the loan application from Granite Peak Lenders, the one he had forged, the one that had been rejected. She looked at it, then looked at him. "Sir," she said, her voice flat, "this is a rejected loan application. It says denied right here at the top." Robert flushed red. "That is just a technicality," he sputtered. "We were reapplying. The intent was there. I have invested time and management into this property. My daughter, Eliza. She is just the name on the paper. We are the decision makers." Ramirez closed the folder and handed it back to him. "In the eyes of the law, sir, The name on the paper is the only thing that matters, and the name on the deed is Northwind Haven, LLC. Are you a member of that LLC? Robert stammered. Well, no, but... Then you have no standing here, Ramirez said. Step back and let the crew work. Harper, seeing her parents failing, tried to throw herself onto a box of her paints that a large man was carrying out. No, those are expensive. You are breaking my energy. She grabbed the man's arm. Ma'am, Ramirez barked, stepping forward. Do not touch the movers. If you interfere physically again, I will place you in cuffs for obstruction. Do you understand? Harper froze. She looked at the handcuffs on Ramirez's belt. She looked at Mom, who was sobbing into her hands. She looked at Dad, who was staring at the rejected loan application as if it were written in a foreign language. For the first time in her life, Harper realized that a tantrum would not change the outcome. The law did not care about her energy. The law did not care about her vibes. She let go of the mover's arm. She shrank back against the railing, small and defeated. I stood by the door, watching my life being cleansed. The removal crew was efficient. They carried out the velvet curtains that Harper had ordered on my credit card. They carried out the easel. They carried out the bags of organic almond milk she had stocked in my fridge. Each item that left the house felt like a hook being pulled out of my skin. It hurt, but it was the clean pain of healing. Karen turned to me. Her eyes were wet, her face blotchy. She switched tactics instantly, dropping the anger and deploying the guilt. Eliza, she wailed, reaching out a hand toward me. Look at your sister. Look at what you're doing to her. She is fragile. You know she cannot handle rejection. I carried you for 9 months. I fed you. I sacrificed my career to raise you. And this is how you repay me? By throwing your own flesh and blood onto the street like garbage? I looked at her. I remembered the chore chart. I remembered the melted ice cream. I remembered the science fair. I am not throwing her on the street. Mom, I said calmly, she has a home. She lives with you. I am just removing her from mine. But we intended for this to be her sanctuary, Karen cried. We did everything for you. We let you have the big room in the old house. Robert stepped up beside her. He wasn't crying. He was looking at me with a cold, simmering hatred. I was going to give you the cabin. Eliza, he said. His voice was low, meant only for me. I had the papers drawn up. When I died, the cabin was going to be yours. I knew you loved it. I was going to reward you. But now you get nothing. You just threw away your inheritance. I felt a flicker of doubt. The cabin, the only place I loved. But then I felt the weight of the manila envelope in my car, the trust document, Grandma Eleanor's signature. He was lying. He was dangling a carrot that he had already tried to eat. He wasn't going to give me the cabin. He was going to mortgage it to pay for Harper's crystals. I looked him dead in the eye. I do not need your inheritance, Dad, I said, and I do not need your rewards. I bought this house. I built this life. I do not need you to give me anything. Robert's face twisted. He looked at the locksmith, who was currently drilling out the lock on the front door to replace it with a high-security keypad. He looked at the police officer standing guard. He looked at the neighbors watching his humiliation. He realized he had lost control of the asset. He had lost control of the narrative. And worst of all, he had lost control of me. Fine, he spat. He turned to Karen and Harper. Get in the car, he ordered. But my things, Harper wailed, pointing to the pile of stuff the movers had left on the curb. Leave it, Robert snapped. We will buy new things. We are done here. He turned back to me one last time before getting into the SUV. His hand was on the door handle. You think you are so smart, Eliza, he said. You think you have won because you have a piece of paper and a cop, but you just burned the only bridge you had. We helped you. We co-signed for you. We stood by you, and you treat us like criminals. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. From this moment on, you are on your own. Do not call us when you fail, and do not expect us to cover for you when the bills come due. You want to be independent? Fine, pay the price. He got in the car. Karen scrambled in after him, still sobbing. Harper gave me one last look, a look of pure, unadulterated venom, and climbed into the back seat. The SUV reversed aggressively, tires spinning on the grass, and sped away down the street. The silence that followed was ringing. Officer Ramirez let out a breath. "Well," she said, "that went about as well as could be expected." She tipped her hat to me. "I will file the report. Ms. Thornton, if they return, call 911 immediately. You have a restraining order in the works?" "My lawyer is filing it Monday," I said. "Good. Get those locks changed." She got in her cruiser and drove away. I stood there for a long time. The movers finished clearing the curb, tossing Harper's Vibe into the back of their truck to be hauled to the dump. The locksmith finished installing the new deadbolt. I paid them. I tipped them heavily. I went inside. The house was quiet. The air smelled of sawdust from the drill. The sage-green walls were safe. I locked the new door. I engaged the new deadbolt. I walked through the empty rooms. My office was mine again. The kitchen was mine. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt free. But Robert's words kept echoing in my head. "We co-signed for you. We stood by you." It was a lie. Of course, they had never co-signed for anything. I had built my credit alone. I had built my life alone. Or so I thought. Evening fell. I fed Moose. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat in the leather chair, listening to the silence. There was a knock at the door. My heart jumped. I checked the new camera feed on my phone. It wasn't my parents. It was a courier. I opened the door. "Delivery for Eliza Thornton," the man said, handing me a thick, rigid envelope. "Sign here." I signed. He left. I looked at the return address. It was from a bank, not my bank, not Granite Peak Lenders. It was First National Mortgage. I frowned. I didn't have any business with First National. I tore open the tab. Inside was a notice of default and acceleration. I read the cover letter. My hands started to shake, spilling tea onto the floor. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, this notice is to inform you that the mortgage on the property located at 104 Maple Drive is in default due to non-payment. Furthermore, as per the terms of the secondary financing agreement dated 6 months ago, the lender is exercising its right to call the loan due." I scanned down the page. 104 Maple Drive. That was my parents' house. They were losing their house. But why was this sent to me? I turned the page. I saw the loan details. It was a massive home equity loan, taken out 6 months ago. And there, at the bottom of the page, under the section Guarantor Information, was my name. Eliza Thornton. And next to it was my social security number. And next to that was a signature, a forgery. Yes, but a forgery on a document that had been notarized. I stared at the notary stamp. It was from a woman named Brenda Miller. I knew Brenda Miller. She was my mother's best friend. She was the woman who had come to my birthday parties. She was a notary public. They hadn't just tried to get a loan yesterday. They had already taken out a loan 6 months ago. They had mortgaged their own house to the hilt, likely to fund Harper's business or pay off her debts. And because their credit was shot, they had used me as the backup. They had used my good credit, my name, and a friendly notary to push the paperwork through without me ever knowing. And now, they had stopped paying. I remembered Dad's parting words, "Pay the price." He knew. He knew this letter was coming. He knew the house of cards was collapsing, and he had made sure that when it fell, the debris would crush me too. I dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor, landing next to the spot where Harper had stood and screamed about family. I taught my clients that a breach is rarely a single event. It is a cascade. You find one hole, and you think you are safe, but the hacker has been in the system for months, planting logic bombs, waiting for the right moment to detonate. I looked at the letter. They had detonated the bomb. I stood in my empty, secure house, behind my new locks and my high walls. I was physically safe, but legally, I was tethered to a sinking ship that was on fire. I picked up the phone. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Harper. I called Elliot Calder. "It is me." I said when he answered, "Do not file the restraining order yet."
"Why?" he asked.
"Because," I said, looking at my forged signature on the foreclosure notice, "I am going to need to file criminal charges instead." The war wasn't over. The battlefield had just shifted, and this time, I wasn't going to just defend, I was going to prosecute. The conference room at First National Mortgage was not designed for family reunions. It was designed for acquisitions, mergers, and in this case, the dissection of a felony. The walls were glass. The table was a slab of cold marble, and the air conditioning was set to a temperature that discouraged emotional outbursts. I sat on one side of the table, flanked by my lawyer, Elliot Calder. Across from us sat my parents, Robert and Karen, and my sister, Harper. They looked small in the oversized leather chairs. The arrogance they had worn in my living room was gone, replaced by a fidgety, sweaty anxiety. At the head of the table sat Mr. Henderson, the head of the bank's fraud department. He had a file open in front of him. He did not look like a man who cared about family vibes. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "We have reviewed the loan documents regarding the property at 104 Maple Drive," he began. His voice was dry, devoid of inflection. "Specifically, we have looked at the secondary guarantor addendum that was added to the file 6 months ago. This addendum used the credit profile of Eliza Thornton to secure a home equity line of credit in the amount of $75,000. He paused, looking over his spectacles at my father. "However, upon forensic review, we have found significant irregularities. The contact information listed for Ms. Thornton, phone number and email, does not match any records in our database or the credit bureaus. Furthermore, the signature on the guarantor form does not match the signature on file for Ms. Thornton's existing accounts, nor does it match the signature on her driver's license." Karen leaned forward. Her hands were clasped on the table, knuckles white. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice trembling with a forced sweetness. "It was a chaotic time. Papers get mixed up. Eliza agreed to help us. She probably just signed it quickly. You know how busy young people are these days." Calder didn't say a word. He simply reached for the remote control on the table and pointed it at the large monitor mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life. It displayed a spreadsheet log. "This is the metadata from the bank's secure upload portal," Calder said. He spoke with the precision of a surgeon. "This log shows exactly when the signed guarantor form was uploaded to the server. It was uploaded on October 14th at 2:45 in the afternoon." He clicked a button. A map appeared next to the log. "And this is the geolocation of the IP address that performed the upload. It traces back to a residential internet service provider account registered to Robert Thornton at 104 Maple Drive." Calder turned to look at me. "Ms. Thornton, where were you on October 14th at 2:45 in the afternoon?" "I was in Seattle," I said, my voice steady. "I was presenting at a cybersecurity conference. I have the flight records, the hotel receipts, and the conference agenda to prove it. I was 2,000 miles away from that computer." Calder clicked the remote again. A new image appeared. It was a screenshot of an email outbox. "And finally," Calder said, "this is a subpoenaed record from Mr. Robert Thornton's email provider. It shows the PDF file titled Eliza Guarantee Signed, PDF being sent from his account to the notary, Brenda Miller, 10 minutes before it was uploaded to the bank." The silence in the room was absolute. Karen stared at the screen. The narrative she had built, the helpful daughter, the confused paperwork, disintegrated under the cold, hard light of digital evidence. "You made that up," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You hacked it. You work in computers. You forged the logs to frame your own father." Harper started crying, a soft, hiccuping sound. I did not know. She sobbed into her hands. "I did not know you guys did that. I just thought we had money again." Robert did not speak. He sat with his hands under the table. I could see his shoulders vibrating. He was looking at the marble surface as if hoping it would open up and swallow him whole. Calder ignored the outburst. He opened his briefcase and slid a single sheet of paper across the table to Mr. Henderson. This is a certified copy of Ms. Thornton's actual signature, taken from the closing documents of Northwind Haven LLC, dated 3 years prior. Please compare it to the document in your file. Mr. Henderson took the paper. He looked at it. He looked at the loan file. He looked at it again. The difference is obvious, Henderson said. The slant is wrong. The loops are wrong. He closed the file with a heavy thud. First National Mortgage takes fraud very seriously, he said, looking at my parents. We are removing Ms. Thornton's name and social security number from this loan immediately. She is no longer liable for this debt. He leaned forward. However, that leaves the loan unsecured and in default, and it leaves us with a documented case of bank fraud. We are obligated to refer this matter to the federal authorities for investigation. Karen let out a strangled gasp. She grabbed Robert's arm. Robert, do something! Robert looked up. His face was gray. We can pay it, he whispered. We just need time. You do not have time, Henderson said, unless... He looked at Calder. Unless the victim declines to press charges, and we can come to a civil settlement regarding the remaining debt. Calder nodded. He turned to my parents. Here is the offer, he said. Eliza will not pursue criminal charges for identity theft. The bank will not pursue criminal charges for bank fraud. But in exchange, you will sign a binding legal agreement right now. He pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase. This is a formal admission of the unauthorized use of Eliza's identity. It includes a permanent restraining order regarding her finances. It states that you will never again attempt to use her name, her credit, or her property for any purpose. It states that you will not contact her regarding any financial matters, and it states that you will not approach her residence or her place of work. Karen stared at him, but if we sign that, we admit we did it. You did do it, Calder said coldly, and if you do not sign it, Eliza walks out of this room and walks straight into the FBI field office 2 blocks away. Harper looked up, her mascara running down her face. Mom, sign it, she screamed. I cannot go to jail. I have a brand to build. She looked at me with pure hatred. You are ruining everything. Eliza, you pushed them to this. If you had just helped us, none of this would have happened. Now I am never going to get any help from you again. For the first time, they weren't a united front. Harper was blaming them. Karen was blaming me. Robert was blaming the world. Robert hesitated. He looked at the pen Calder had placed in front of him. If I sign this, he said, his voice raspy, I lose my leverage. I lose my daughter. You lost your daughter the moment you forged her signature. I said. He picked up the pen. Wait. The voice came from the doorway. The heavy glass door swung open. My grandmother, Eleanor, walked in. She was using her cane, but she moved with a force that made the air in the room shift. Behind her walked a tall man in a gray suit, her own estate lawyer. She walked to the table and placed a thick file down in the center. Hello, Robert. Hello, Karen. Mom? Robert said, confused. What are you doing here? I am here to make sure you understand the stakes, Eleanor said. She opened the file. You are worried about losing the house on Maple Drive, she said, but you are forgetting about the cabin. Robert's eyes widened. The cabin is fine. I am going to handle the cabin. No, you are not, Eleanor said, because you do not own it. She slid a document toward him. I transferred the deed to the cabin into the Eleanor Thornton Living Trust 3 days ago, and I transferred the majority of my stock portfolio into that same trust. She pointed a shaking finger at me, and the sole trustee of that trust is Eliza. Robert looked at the paper. He looked at me. The color drained from his face completely. You gave it to her? He whispered. Everything? I gave it to the only person who will not gamble it away, Eleanor said. She leaned over the table, looking at her son and daughter-in-law. You two have spent your entire lives protecting the weak bird, she said, her voice trembling with rage. You protected Harper so much you were ready to burn down the whole forest just to keep her warm. Well, I will not let you burn Eliza. She is the only one who knows how to plant trees." She tapped the agreement Calder had laid out. "If you do not sign that paper, if you do not agree to leave Eliza alone and respect her boundaries, then the trust has a clause. It triggers immediately upon any criminal conviction or civil judgment for fraud against any family member." She paused. "The clause states that you are disinherited, completely, no cabin access, no stocks, no inheritance when I die. You will lose the forest. Robert." The room was silent. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Robert looked at the cabin deed. He looked at the fraud investigation file. He looked at the agreement. He was cornered. He had no moves left. The house of cards had not just fallen. It had been incinerated. He picked up the pen. His hand shook violently. He signed the agreement. He pushed it to Karen. She wept, loud, ugly sobs. But she signed it. Her tears were no longer a weapon. They were just water. Harper signed it last. She didn't read it. She just scribbled her name, muttering under her breath. "You are a monster. Eliza," she whispered as she pushed the paper away. "You have everything now. Are you happy?" I looked at her. I looked at the signatures. I looked at my grandmother, who gave me a small, fierce nod. "I am safe," I said, "and that is better than happy." Calder took the documents. He checked the signatures. He handed a copy to Mr. Henderson and slid a copy to me. He leaned in close to me and whispered, "It is done. From now on, they do not just lack the keys to your house. They do not have the keys to touch your life legally ever again." The meeting ended. My parents and Harper left first. They walked out like ghosts, stripped of their power, arguing in hushed tones as they went down the hall. I walked out with Eleanor and Calder. The sun outside was blindingly bright. I went home. I parked in my garage. I walked into my house. It was evening. The golden hour light was hitting the sage-green walls. Moose was asleep on the rug in the living room. He lifted his head, thumped his tail once, and went back to snoring. I walked through the rooms. I touched the new keypad lock on the front door. I looked at the security monitor in the hallway. I looked at the wall where I had hung the framed copy of the agreement Calder had given me. It hung there like a shield. There was no yellow truck in the driveway. There were no boxes of vibes in the guest room. There was just space. My space. The doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was Tara. She was holding a pizza box and a 6-pack of beer. I opened the door. "Victory dinner?" she asked, grinning. I let her in. We sat on the floor of the living room, eating pizza straight from the box. "So," Tara said, raising a beer, "you did it. You beat the boss level." I took a sip. It tasted cold and crisp. "I did," I said. Tara looked around. "You know, you officially upgraded. You are not just the strong daughter anymore. You are the CEO of your own life. Hostile takeover averted." I laughed. It felt light. It felt real. Later, after Tara left, I walked out into the backyard. The air was cool. The stars were out. I could hear the distant hum of the highway. But here, behind my 6-foot fence, it was quiet. Moose trotted out beside me. He sniffed the perimeter, then ran a lap around the grass, chasing an invisible moth. I took a deep breath. The air filled my lungs, expanding into the space that used to be occupied by fear and obligation. I looked at the fence line. I looked at the house. I looked at the horizon. "This house is mine," I whispered to the night. "This boundary is mine. And this time, no one crosses it unless I open the door." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below sharing your location and your thoughts on Eliza's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.